The kingdom calls him the Iron Duke, but in the ruin of Blackthorn Manor, Lucian stands alone among ghosts. 6 years of exile end tonight, not by choice, but necessity. The obsidian halls of Ravenspire kept him powerful, feared, untouchable. But this decaying estate on the cliff's edge holds something worse than enemies. Memories that bleed. He came to bury the past and sell the corpse of his ancestral home. Instead, candlelight flickers behind windows that should be dark, and a woman's shadow moves through rooms he abandoned to rot. Power taught him to crush rebellion. Guilt taught him to survive. But what waits inside those walls will teach the Duke something far more dangerous, that even monsters can want what they cannot own. Stay close, because when a man who rules through fear finally faces what he's been running from, the entire kingdom will feel the impact. The carriage wheels cracked against frozen earth like bones breaking under pressure. Lucian Blackthorn watched the northern landscape pass through rain-streaked glass, his expression carved from the same stone as the cliffs rising in the distance. 6 years since he'd taken this road. 6 years since he'd let Blackthorn Manor collapse into memory and ruin while he ruled from Ravenspire's obsidian fortress, crushing traitors and bankrupting nobles who forgot their place. The kingdom whispered his name with fear. Good. Fear kept men honest when morality failed. But tonight, financial necessity dragged him back to the one place he'd sworn never to see again. His steward, Marcus, sat across from him in the carriage, reviewing documents with the mechanical efficiency of a man who understood that hesitation around the Duke meant unemployment, or worse. Marcus cleared his throat. A calculated risk. You're certain about the sale, Your Grace? The estate's been neglected, but the land value alone could... I don't want analysis, Marcus. I want it liquidated. Lucian's voice cut through the carriage interior like a blade through silk. Soft, precise, deadly. Of course, Your Grace. The buyers arrive in 3 days. I've arranged for basic repairs to make the property presentable. The roof in the east wing needs... Then fix it. Marcus nodded, returning to his papers. Smart man. He'd learned years ago that the Duke didn't tolerate conversation disguised as concern. The carriage climbed higher into the hills, and Lucien felt the familiar weight settle across his shoulders. Guilt wore many masks, but up here it wore his brother's face. Thomas, 23 years old when the hunting accident tore him apart. 23 years of laughter and reckless brilliance, gone because Lucien had been too arrogant to notice the loose saddle strap, too focused on impressing visiting lords to check the horses properly. The aristocracy called it tragedy. Lucien called it what it was, negligence dressed in noble silk. He'd abandoned Blackthorn Manor the same week they buried Thomas. Let the servants scatter. Let the gardens choke on weeds. Let the roof cave in and the walls crumble. The estate became a monument to everything Lucien refused to face, and distance made survival possible. Until his financial advisors discovered that one of his corrupt agents had been quietly embezzling funds, using Blackthorn Manor's neglect as cover for fraudulent transactions. The numbers didn't lie. Lucien needed to sell the estate to cover the losses without admitting weakness to his enemies. So here he was, returning to the tomb he'd built from guilt. The carriage rounded the final bend, and Blackthorn Manor rose from the cliffs like a corpse refusing to stay buried. Lucien expected darkness, ruin, silence. Instead, light burned behind the windows. He leaned forward, his jaw tightening. Marcus, who authorized occupation? Marcus looked up, confusion flickering across his features before training smothered it. No one, Your Grace. The property has been vacant since... Then explain the candlelight. The steward pressed his face against the glass, and Lucien watched the man's composure fracture. That's impossible. I inspected the property myself 2 months ago. It was empty. Lucien's hand moved to the door handle before the carriage fully stopped. He stepped into the freezing rain, his boots sinking into mud that had once been manicured gravel. The manor loomed above him, Gothic architecture twisted by neglect into something between grandeur and decay. But smoke rose from the chimneys, actual smoke. Someone had turned his brother's grave into a home. Marcus scrambled out behind him, already barking orders at the driver and fumbling for the estate keys. Lucien ignored him, walking toward the main entrance with the deliberate pace of a predator circling prey. His coat hung heavy with rain, but he didn't feel the cold. Anger burned hotter. The front door stood slightly ajar. Lucien pushed it open, and warmth rushed out to meet the winter night. Inside, the entrance hall glowed with firelight. The marble floors he remembered buried under dust now gleamed with recent cleaning. Furniture he'd left covered in sheets had been restored, polished, arranged like someone actually lived here. His hands curled into fists. "Your Grace, perhaps we should—" "Stay here, Marcus." Lucien moved deeper into the manor, his footsteps echoing through corridors that should have been silent. He passed the dining hall where his family once gathered, now lit by candles that threw dancing shadows across restored portraits. Someone had cleaned the paintings. His father's stern face stared down from the wall, and beside him, his mother's gentle smile, and Thomas. Lucien stopped. His brother's portrait hung exactly where it had 6 years ago, but the frame had been cleaned, the canvas treated. Thomas grinned out at him with that reckless confidence that used to fill these halls with laughter and chaos. Who the hell did this? Movement upstairs. Footsteps light and quick, followed by a child's cough. Lucien took the staircase 2 steps at a time, fury driving him forward. The second-floor hallway stretched before him, and he followed the sound of voices to what used to be the library. The door stood open, revealing a woman kneeling beside a small boy bundled in blankets near the fireplace. She looked up as Lucien filled the doorway. For 3 seconds, neither spoke. The woman was younger than he expected, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back from a face that carried the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting battles without rest. Her dress was simple, worn but clean, and her hands rested protectively on the child's shoulder. But her eyes... Christ, her eyes didn't flinch. Most people looked at Lucien and saw power wrapped in violence. They saw the Duke who'd bankrupted 3 noble houses in a single season, who'd personally dragged a corrupt magistrate from his bed and thrown him in chains, who ruled the northern territories with the kind of ruthless precision that made rebellion suicide. This woman looked at him and simply waited. The boy coughed again, a wet, rattling sound that spoke of fever and weakness. He couldn't have been more than 7, pale and shivering despite the fire's heat. "Who are you?" Lucien said quietly. "And why are you in my house?" The woman stood slowly, keeping herself between him and the child. Her chin lifted slightly, not defiance exactly, but refusal to collapse under his presence. "My name is Evelyn Mercer. I have a legal lease for this property." Lucien's laugh came out cold and sharp. "A lease? From whom?" "Your estate agent, Mr. Hartwell. He showed me the documents 6 months ago when I needed somewhere safe to raise my son." Hartwell, the same agent currently facing embezzlement charges. The same man who'd been using Blackthorn properties to run his personal schemes. Lucien stepped into the room, and Evelyn immediately shifted, her body language screaming protection even as she maintained eye contact. Impressive. Most women of her class would have been on their knees by now, begging or weeping or both. "Mr. Hartwell is a criminal," Lucien said. "Whatever documents he showed you are worthless. This estate belongs to me, and I'm selling it in 3 days." The color drained from Evelyn's face, but her voice stayed steady. "I paid 6 months' rent in advance. Everything I had. If the lease is invalid, then I've been robbed, and you're telling me I have nowhere to go. That's not my problem." The boy coughed again, harder this time, and Evelyn dropped to her knees beside him, pressing a hand to his forehead. Lucien watched her whisper something soft and soothing, watched the child relax slightly under her touch. "He's sick," Evelyn said without looking up. "The fever started 3 days ago. The village doctor said he needs rest and warmth, not travel in winter storms. Then take him to an inn." "With what money?" "Your Grace, I told you I spent everything on the lease." Lucien felt the familiar cold calculation settle over him. This was a problem. Problems had solutions. Emotions complicated solutions. "How old is the boy?" "His name is Oliver. He's 7. And his father? Dead. 18 months now." Lucien studied the woman's profile, the tight set of her shoulders, the way her fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the boy's blankets. Widows were common enough in aristocratic society. Desperate widows even more so. "You have family? Anyone who can take you in?" Evelyn's silence answered louder than words. Lucien turned toward the window, watching rain batter the glass. 3 days until the buyers arrived. 3 days to clear the property and finalize the sale. This woman and her sick child represented a complication he didn't need. The smart play was obvious. Offer her enough coin for travel expenses, send her to the village, let someone else handle her problems. He'd built an empire on smart plays, on ruthless efficiency, on never letting sentiment cloud judgment. He looked back at Evelyn, still kneeling beside her son, and something inside his chest twisted wrong. The boy coughed again, and this time there was blood on his lips. Evelyn saw it too. Her composure finally cracked, fear flooding her expression as she grabbed a cloth and pressed it to Oliver's mouth. No, 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 sweetheart, it's all right. Mama's here. Get the doctor, Lucien said. Evelyn looked up sharply. What? I said, get the village doctor. Now. Marcus! His steward appeared in the doorway instantly, decades of training overriding confusion. Your Grace? Ride to the village. Bring the doctor back immediately. Tell him the Duke requires his services for a child with fever and bloody cough. Marcus hesitated for exactly half a second before nodding and disappearing down the hallway at a run. Lucien moved to the fireplace, adding more wood without asking permission. The room needed heat if the boy was going to survive the night. Behind him, he heard Evelyn's breathing shift from panic to something closer to shock. You're helping us? Lucien didn't turn around. I'm preventing a child from dying in my house. There's a difference. Why? Because I've had enough death in this manner. The words came out harder than he intended, sharp edges that cut the air between them. Lucien straightened, brushing ash from his hands, and finally looked at Evelyn directly. She was crying, silent tears tracking down her cheeks while she held her son, relief and confusion and exhaustion all tangled together in her expression. Christ, he was too tired for this. The doctor will examine the boy, Lucien said. You'll stay tonight because moving him would be dangerous. Tomorrow, we discuss terms. Terms? You can't stay here permanently. The estate is being sold. But I won't throw a sick child into a winter storm, and I won't let you starve in some village inn while your money runs out. Evelyn wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and Lucien watched her rebuild her composure piece by piece. She had spine. He'd give her that much. What kind of terms? That depends on what you're capable of beyond trespassing. I'm not a criminal, Your Grace. No. You're a desperate woman who made a bad deal with a corrupt agent. But desperation makes people dangerous or useful, and I prefer useful. Oliver stirred in her arms, murmuring something fever-soft. Evelyn adjusted his blankets, her attention split between her son and the Duke standing in the firelight. What are you proposing? Lucien crossed his arms, studying the library. Someone had cleaned this room too. Organized the books, swept the floors, restored furniture that had been rotting when he left. You did all this? The cleaning, the repairs? Most of it. Oliver helped when he felt well enough. Why? Evelyn looked at him like the question confused her. Because it's our home. 3 words that hit harder than they should have. Our home. Like this place could ever belong to anyone again after what happened here. Lucien turned away, moving toward the window. In the glass, he could see Evelyn's reflection watching him, waiting for judgment or mercy or whatever the hell dukes were supposed to dispense. He felt neither merciful nor just. He felt tired. You can stay, Lucien said quietly, until the boy recovers. After that, we'll see. See what? If you're worth keeping around. Evelyn's breath caught, but before she could respond, the sound of horses reached them through the storm. The doctor. Marcus had made excellent time. Lucien headed for the door, then paused. One more thing, Mrs. Mercer. Yes? Don't make me regret this. He left before she could answer, descending the stairs to meet the doctor and wondering what the hell he'd just agreed to. Helping people wasn't his strength. Crushing them was. Building empires from their broken ambitions was. But the image of that boy coughing blood stayed with him. And the way Evelyn had looked at him, not with fear but with something closer to recognition, made his chest feel strange, dangerous. The doctor arrived soaked and irritated until he recognized who'd summoned him. Then irritation became nervous efficiency. Lucien led him upstairs without explanation, watching the man examine Oliver with professional detachment. Pneumonia, the doctor pronounced after several minutes. Early stages, but serious. He'll need rest, warmth, and medicine. I can prepare a tonic, but he shouldn't travel for at least a week. A week? The buyers came in 3 days. Lucien nodded. Do what's necessary. After the doctor left instructions and departed with Marcus, Lucy found himself alone in the hallway outside the library. Through the door, he could hear Evelyn singing something soft to her son, a lullaby, gentle and worn with repetition. His mother used to sing to Thomas like that. Lucian pressed his palm against the door frame, the wood solid and real under his hand. 6 years he'd stayed away from this place. 6 years of ruling from Ravenspire's cold halls, building a reputation for ruthlessness that kept the kingdom's nobility in line through sheer terror. And now he was back, harboring a widow and her sick child, delaying a sale that would solve his financial problems. The aristocracy would call it weakness if they knew. Maybe it was. Lucien pushed away from the door and headed toward what used to be his private study. The room was as he'd left it, dusty, dark, filled with ledgers and maps, and the architectural plans for expansions that would never happen. He lit a single candle and sat behind the desk, pulling out paper and ink. First he wrote to his lawyers in London, instructing them to delay the estate sale by 1 week. The buyers wouldn't like it, but they'd accept his terms or find themselves competing with more aggressive offers Lucian would personally arrange. Second, he wrote to his network of informants, requesting background information on Evelyn Mercer, her late husband's name, family connections, financial status, everything. Knowledge was power, and Lucian never entered any situation blind. Third, he wrote to Ravenspire's head of staff, informing them he'd be absent for the next fortnight. The Northern Territories would survive without him for 2 weeks. His reputation alone would keep the nobility in line. By the time he finished, dawn was bleeding gray light through the study windows. Lucien hadn't slept, but exhaustion felt distant, almost irrelevant. He stood, stretching muscles that had locked into position during hours of writing, and walked back toward the library. Eveline sat in a chair beside the fire, her head tilted back against the cushion, asleep. Oliver lay in the makeshift bed she'd created, his breathing easier now that the medicine had taken effect. Lucien stood in the doorway, watching them, mother and son. Vulnerability and trust wrapped together in firelight. He should leave, let them rest, focus on salvaging his financial situation and selling this cursed estate before more memories crawled out of the walls. Instead, he found himself walking to the other chair, sitting down across from Eveline. She didn't wake, but her hand twitched slightly toward her son, even in sleep. Protective instinct ran deep. Lucien understood instinct. His whole life had been built on predatory calculation, on recognizing threats before they materialized, on striking first and asking questions later. But sitting here in the library where Thomas used to argue philosophy with visiting scholars, watching a woman protect her child with nothing but determination and exhausted love, Lucien felt something shift inside his chest. Not weakness, curiosity. He wanted to know what made Evelyn Mercer look at him without flinching. He wanted to understand how desperation hadn't crushed her into submissive terror the way it did most people. He wanted things he'd buried 6 years ago alongside his brother. Outside, the storm finally broke, rain turning to sleet that rattled against the windows like skeletal fingers. The sound should have been ominous. Instead, with the fire crackling and 2 people breathing softly in sleep, it almost felt peaceful. Lucien closed his eyes, just for a moment. When he opened them again, morning had arrived in full, and Eveline was awake, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You stayed," she said quietly. "I fell asleep. You could have left." Lucien sat forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I could have done a lot of things, Mrs. Mercer. I could have thrown you out last night. I could have let your son's fever run its course. I could have sold this place out from under you without a second thought. But you didn't." "No. Why?" The question again. The same one she'd asked last night. The one he still couldn't answer honestly because honesty required examining things he'd spent 6 years avoiding. "Because I'm curious," Lucien said instead. "You cleaned this entire manor despite having no legal right to be here. You restored portraits and furniture and rooms that should have been left to rot. Why?" Eveline looked toward her son, then back at Lucien. "Because beautiful things shouldn't be abandoned just because they carry pain." The words landed like a punch to the sternum. Lucien stood abruptly, needing distance, needing air, needing something other than this woman's unsettling perception cutting through his carefully maintained armor. "The buyers are delayed," he said. "You have 1 week to find somewhere else to live. After that, the sale proceeds and you leave. Understood?" Eveline rose to face him, and despite the difference in their heights and power, she didn't back down. 1 week. And then what happens to Oliver? That's not my concern, isn't it? Lucien's jaw tightened. Don't mistake temporary charity for permanent obligation, Mrs. Mercer. I'm giving you time to recover and plan. Use it wisely. He turned toward the door, but her voice stopped him. Your brother's portrait. You haven't looked at it once since you arrived. Lucian froze. His hand gripped the doorframe hard enough that wood creaked under pressure. That's none of your business. You loved him. Stop talking. And you blame yourself for his death. Lucian spun around, and Evelyn actually took a step back. Good. She should remember who she was dealing with. You know nothing about me or my family, Lucian said, his voice dropping into the dangerous register that preceded violence or ruin. You're a trespasser with a sick child and nowhere else to go. I've shown you mercy you didn't earn. Don't confuse that with invitation to psychoanalyze my life. Evelyn's throat worked as she swallowed, but when she spoke, her voice stayed level. I apologize. Your Grace? That was presumptuous. Yes, it was, but I understand loss, and I understand guilt. They're different things, but they wear similar faces. Lucian wanted to leave, needed to leave, but something kept him rooted in place, staring at this woman who should have been terrified and submissive, but instead stood there offering understanding like it was worth something. Oliver stirred, and Evelyn immediately moved to check his forehead. The fever's breaking, she murmured. Thank God. The gratitude in her voice was so raw it hurt to hear. Lucien left before he did something stupid like staying longer. He found Marcus in the entrance hall, reviewing repair schedules with workers who'd arrived at dawn. Your Grace, the East Wing roof needs immediate attention, or it'll collapse during the next storm. I've hired— Do it, Lucien interrupted. Whatever repairs are necessary, authorize them. I want this estate maintained properly until the sale completes. Marcus blinked. I thought you wanted minimal investment. Plans changed. The steward wisely didn't ask why. Very good, Your Grace. And the residents? They stay. For now. Lucien walked past him into the morning cold, heading toward the stables. The building was in better condition than expected, probably because Evelyn had been maintaining it. He found his horse already groomed and fed. Someone had been busy. He rode toward the cliffs, following paths he'd once known by heart. The ocean crashed against rocks below, violent and indifferent. Up here, the wind carried salt and memory in equal measure. This was where Thomas died. Not exactly this spot, but close enough that Lucien could see the ridge where his brother's horse had stumbled, where Thomas had fallen, where everything broke beyond repair. The aristocracy called it accident, tragedy. One of those inevitable sorrows that befell even powerful families. They didn't know Lucien had been the one to ready the horses that morning. Didn't know he'd been distracted by political visitors, cutting corners, trusting stable hands instead of checking equipment himself. Didn't know that Thomas had called out to him seconds before the fall, laughing about something stupid, and Lucien had been too focused on impressing a visiting lord to respond. The last sound his brother made wasn't laughter. It was Lucien's name. He sat on his horse at the cliff's edge, staring at the place where guilt was born, and wondered what the hell he was doing back here. A week, he'd told Evelyn. 1 week to find somewhere else to go. But even as he'd said it, Lucien knew the truth. There was nowhere else. A widow with a sick child and no money had exactly zero options in aristocratic society. She'd end up in some workhouse or worse, and Oliver would probably die before spring. Not your problem, Lucien told himself. Except it felt like his problem, because Evelyn had cleaned his brother's portrait, had restored rooms Thomas used to occupy, had breathed life back into a manor Lucien had tried to kill through neglect. And when she looked at him, she saw something other than the Iron Duke. She saw someone capable of help instead of harm. Lucien turned his horse back toward the manor, riding through morning mist that clung to the landscape like guilt clung to memory. When he returned, he found Evelyn in the kitchen, preparing broth for Oliver while directing 2 servants through cleaning tasks. The workers jumped to attention when Lucien entered, but Evelyn simply glanced up and nodded before returning to her cooking, like he belonged here, like this was normal. The servants looked between them nervously, clearly uncertain about hierarchy and protocol. Mrs. Mercer, Lucien said carefully, a word. Evelyn set down her spoon and followed him into the adjacent hallway. She'd changed clothes since morning, wearing a simple dress that had probably been expensive once but now showed the wear of hard use. You're directing my servants, Lucien observed. Someone needed to. The manor requires significant work. And your Mr. Marcus seemed overwhelmed by the scope. So you took charge. Eveline met his eyes. If that's inappropriate, I apologize. But I've been managing this household for 6 months. I know what needs attention. Lucian considered her for a long moment. Most women of her class would have deferred to male authority instantly. Eveline just stated facts and waited for him to catch up. You said you spent everything on the lease. What did you do before that? I managed my late husband's estate. Small compared to yours, but sufficient to require organization. And after he died? Eveline's expression tightened. His brother claimed the property. I was asked to leave. Asked, ordered. But I prefer asked. It sounds more civil. Where's Oliver's uncle now? Eveline looked away. Searching for us, I imagine. Cedric believes Oliver's inheritance should have passed to him. But it didn't. My husband's will was clear. Everything goes to Oliver when he comes of age. Until then, I'm his guardian. And Cedric disapproves. Cedric disapproves of women having any authority whatsoever. He also disapproves of nephews who complicate his financial schemes. Lucien understood immediately. Oliver was leverage, assets disguised as family. If Cedric could claim guardianship, he'd control the inheritance until the boy reached majority. Plenty of time to drain every resource dry. Is Cedric dangerous? Eveline's laugh was bitter. He's an aristocrat, Your Grace. They're all dangerous in different ways. Fair point. Lucien leaned against the wall, studying this woman who'd somehow turned his abandoned estate into a functioning household while hiding from predatory relatives. She had skills, intelligence, and desperation that made people either useful or unpredictable. He preferred useful. I'm proposing a temporary arrangement, Lucien said. You continue managing the household repairs. In exchange, you and Oliver stay until he's recovered, and you've secured alternative housing. I'll provide a letter of reference to help with employment. Eveline stared at him. You're offering me work? I'm offering you a transaction. You need time and resources. I need this estate maintained before the sale. We both benefit. And after the sale? Lucien hesitated. After the sale, this conversation becomes someone else's problem. But I won't put you back on the street without options. Why? The question again. Persistent as winter rain. Because I'm tired of this place being a monument to death, Lucien said quietly. If you're going to inhabit it, make it worth something. Eveline studied him with an intensity that felt uncomfortably close to understanding. Then carefully, deliberately, she extended her hand. Agreed, Your Grace. Lucien looked at her offered hand. In aristocratic society, women didn't shake hands with dukes. They curtsied, they deferred. They certainly didn't negotiate like equals. He took her hand anyway. Her grip was firm, calloused from work, warmer than expected. The contact lasted exactly 3 seconds before Lucien released her and stepped back. Marcus will provide whatever supplies you need. Report progress weekly. Understood. Eveline turned to leave, then paused. Your Grace. Thank you. For the doctor, for letting us stay. Lucien nodded once. Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Mercer. I'm not doing this out of kindness. I know. Good. Then we understand each other. He watched her return to the kitchen, watched her immediately resume organizing tasks and directing servants with quiet efficiency. The household responded to her naturally, like they'd been waiting for someone to take charge. Lucien headed upstairs to check on Oliver. The boy was awake, propped up against pillows, looking fragile but alert. When Lucien entered, Oliver's eyes went wide. You're the Duke, the child whispered. I am. Mama said you own this house. Technically correct. Oliver looked around the library with obvious affection. It's a good house. I like the books. Lucien moved closer, studying the titles Eveline had organized on nearby shelves. Philosophy, history, poetry. Thomas's collection, preserved and cleaned. Your mother says you helped with the restoration, Lucien said. I tried, but I'm not very strong. Strength comes in different forms. Oliver coughed, wincing, but his eyes never left Lucien's face. Are you going to make us leave? The question was direct, childlike, devastating in its simplicity. Lucien sat in the chair Eveline had occupied earlier. Your mother and I have an arrangement. You'll stay until you're well. And then? Then we'll see. Oliver nodded, accepting this non-answer with more grace than most adults managed. Mama says you're very powerful. She says dukes rule everything. Not everything. Just enough. Do you like ruling? No one had ever asked Lucian that before. Not directly. Not without political maneuvering wrapped around the question. He considered lying, considered deflecting, considered shutting down the conversation entirely. Instead, he said, "It's necessary." Oliver frowned. "That's not the same as liking it. No, it's not." "What do you like, then?" Lucian looked at this small, sick child who asked questions like they mattered, who looked at the Duke without fear or calculation, who simply wanted honest answers. "I used to like architecture," Lucian admitted. "Building things. My brother and I planned extensive renovations for this estate." "What happened?" "My brother died. The plans stopped." Oliver's expression shifted into something older than his years. "That's sad." "Yes. Mama says sad things don't disappear. They just become part of you." Lucian felt something crack inside his chest. "Your mother is perceptive. She's smart and brave, even when she's scared." The simple faith in Oliver's voice did strange things to Lucian's carefully maintained emotional distance. This boy loved his mother with uncomplicated devotion, trusted her with absolute certainty. When had Lucian last trusted anyone like that? "You should rest," Lucian said, standing. "The medicine will work better if you sleep. Will you come back?" The question surprised him. "Why?" "Because you're interesting, and you don't talk to me like I'm stupid." Lucian almost smiled. That would have been dishonest. Exactly. He left before the conversation revealed anything else inconvenient about his deteriorating emotional armor. The manor felt different now, still heavy with memory, but less suffocating, like someone had opened windows he'd forgotten existed. Downstairs, Marcus intercepted him with reports and decisions that needed authorization. Lucian handled them mechanically, his mind elsewhere. By evening, Evelyn had transformed the dining hall. Fresh flowers somehow appeared on the table despite winter's grip. Candles burned in polished holders. The meal itself was simple but well prepared, served with efficiency that spoke of practiced management. Lucian ate in silence while Evelyn checked on Oliver upstairs. When she returned, she looked exhausted but satisfied. His fever broke completely, she reported. The doctor was right about the medicine. Good. Evelyn sat across from him, and the servants tactfully withdrew. For several minutes, neither spoke. Outside, wind howled against the manor walls, but inside, firelight kept the darkness manageable. "You were right earlier," Evelyn said finally. "I know nothing about your family or what happened here." Lucian set down his fork. "Then why mention it?" "Because pain recognizes pain, Your Grace. And this house is full of both. He should shut this down. Redirect. Remind her that their arrangement was transactional, not therapeutic." Instead, he said, "Tell me about your husband." Evelyn's hand stilled on her napkin. "Why?" "Because you know about my brother. Fair exchange." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Richard was kind, gentle. He loved books and hated politics. We married young, had Oliver quickly, and built a quiet life. What killed him? Illness. Sudden and brutal. He was gone within weeks, and his brother took everything. Evelyn's expression hardened. Cedric claimed Richard's debts exceeded the estate value. He was lying, but the courts believed him. I had no legal standing, no proof, no allies. So you ran. I protected my son. There's a difference. Lucian recognized survival instinct when he saw it. Evelyn had done what necessity demanded, just like he had. The methods differed, but the core was identical. Protect what matters, regardless of cost. "This, Cedric," Lucian said carefully. "Will he track you here?" "Eventually. Aristocrats have networks. Someone will talk. And when he finds you?" Evelyn met his eyes. "Then I'll deal with it." "How?" "I don't know yet." The honesty was refreshing and terrifying. Most people lied about having plans. Evelyn simply acknowledged she was improvising survival day by day. "If he shows up while you're here," Lucian said quietly, "I'll handle it." Evelyn blinked. "You'd confront another aristocrat over a widow and child?" "I'd confront anyone who disrupts my household." Cedric wouldn't be special. It wasn't entirely true. Lucian would absolutely make Cedric special. Specifically, an example of what happened when men threatened things under Blackthorn protection. But Evelyn didn't need to know that yet. "Thank you," she said softly, "though I hope it doesn't come to that. So do I. Confrontation is tedious." Evelyn almost smiled. "Is that why you're so good at it? Because you find it tedious?" "No. I'm good at it because I don't hesitate. The smile faded, replaced by something more complex. You're not what I expected, Your Grace. What did you expect? A monster. The Iron Duke. The man who bankrupts nobles and crushes rebellion without mercy. And instead, Eveline considered her words carefully. Instead, I found someone who saved my son's life and offered me work instead of exile. Don't mistake necessity for virtue, Mrs. Mercer. I'm not. I'm observing facts. Lucian stood, suddenly needing distance. The conversation had drifted into territory he didn't know how to navigate. Business transactions he understood. Power dynamics made sense. But this, whatever this was, felt dangerous. I have correspondence to handle, he said. Good night. Good night, Your Grace. He retreated to his study, closing the door firmly behind him. But instead of working, Lucien found himself staring at the architectural plans he and Thomas had drawn years ago. Expansions, renovations, dreams built on paper, all abandoned, all dead. Except Eveline had started bringing them back to life. Room by room, portrait by portrait. Beautiful things shouldn't be abandoned just because they carry pain. Her words echoed in the silence. Lucian pressed his palms against the desk, breathing carefully. He'd come here to sell everything and leave. Cut ties. Eliminate the financial problem and return to Ravenspire where power kept memory at a safe distance. But now there was a woman downstairs who looked at him without fear, and a boy who asked honest questions, and a manner that suddenly felt less like a tomb. Lucien pulled out fresh paper and began writing. New instructions for his lawyers, new arrangements for the estate. Nothing permanent. Just adjustments to buy more time while he figured out what the hell he was doing. Dawn arrived before he finished. When Lucien finally emerged from the study, he found Eveline already awake, preparing breakfast while simultaneously directing repairs in the entrance hall. She looked up as he approached. Your Grace, coffee? Please. She poured without fuss, handing him a cup that was exactly the right temperature. Lucien watched her move through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, managing multiple tasks simultaneously. You're enjoying this, he observed. Eveline paused. What? The work. The restoration. You enjoy it. Is that so strange? For someone in your position, yes. Eveline returned to her cooking. Purpose helps. Sitting idle while my son fought fever would have destroyed me. This way, I'm useful. You're more than useful, Mrs. Mercer. You're transforming this place. Is that a problem? Lucian sipped his coffee, considering. 6 days ago, he would have said yes. Now, he wasn't certain. No, he said finally. It's not a problem. Eveline's smile was small but genuine. Good, because I have plans for the library today that you'll probably find excessive, such as complete reorganization. Your brother's collection deserves better than alphabetical sorting. Lucian's hand tightened on his cup. What makes you think you understand Thomas's preferences? I don't, but I understand people who love books. The collection tells stories about what he valued. The observation was too accurate. Thomas had organized his library by theme and emotional resonance, creating conversations between texts that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. Do what you think is right, Lucian said quietly. Eveline nodded, returning to her work. Behind them, Oliver's voice drifted down from upstairs, calling for his mother. I should go, Lucien interrupted. I'll handle breakfast. Eveline's surprise was obvious, but she didn't argue, simply thanked him and hurried toward the stairs. Lucien stood alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the warmth and noise of a functioning household, and realized something terrifying. He didn't want to sell this place anymore, and that decision, more than any business transaction or political maneuver he'd ever made, would change absolutely everything. But before he could process that revelation, Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Your Grace, we have a problem. What kind? A rider just arrived from London. Lord Cedric Mercer is en route to Blackthorn Manor. He'll be here by tomorrow evening. Lucian set down his coffee very carefully. Does he know Eveline is here? The rider suggested as much. Apparently Lord Mercer has been asking questions throughout the Northern Territories. Someone talked. Of course they did. Loyalty only extended as far as coin or fear, and Cedric probably had enough of both to buy information. Lucian's mind shifted immediately into strategic mode. Cedric couldn't be allowed to simply take Eveline and Oliver. But legal options were limited. Widows had few rights, and aristocratic men controlled custody by default in most cases, which meant Lucien needed leverage. "Send word to my contacts in London," he told Marcus. "I want everything on Cedric Mercer. Debts, scandals, business failures, mistresses, illegal transactions. Everything. That could take days. Then work faster. I want preliminary reports by tonight." Marcus nodded and disappeared. Lucien stood in the kitchen, calculating angles and strategies, preparing for confrontation the way he'd prepared for hundreds of others. But this time felt different. This time he wasn't defending territory or protecting reputation. He was protecting people. And that made it personal. Upstairs, Evelyn sang to Oliver, her voice carrying through the manor like light through darkness. Lucien listened to that sound and made his decision. When Cedric Mercer arrived tomorrow, he'd learn what happened when predators threatened things the Duke considered his. And Lucien Blackthorne had never been good at sharing. The kitchen felt smaller after Marcus left. Lucien stood there listening to Eveline's voice drift down from upstairs, that gentle melody she sang to Oliver, and something in his chest pulled tight. Not sentiment, strategy. Because in 18 hours, Cedric Mercer would arrive, and this fragile arrangement Lucien had built would detonate. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time, his boots heavy against wood that Eveline had somehow convinced the servants to polish. The second floor smelled different now, less like decay, more like beeswax and effort. Evelyn looked up when he appeared in the library doorway. Oliver was sitting up against pillows, color finally returning to his pale cheeks. The boy's eyes tracked Lucien with that unsettling directness children sometimes had before society taught them to look away from power. "Mrs. Mercer," Lucien said. "A word, privately." Eveline's expression shifted instantly. She'd learned to read his tone already, to recognize when the Duke's voice dropped into business mode. She pressed a kiss to Oliver's forehead and followed Lucien into the hallway. He closed the library door behind her. "Cedric knows you're here." The blood drained from Eveline's face so fast Lucien thought she might collapse. Her hand shot out, gripping the wall for balance, and he watched her rebuild composure piece by agonizing piece. "How long do I have?" "He arrives tomorrow evening." Eveline's breathing went shallow. "Oliver can't travel yet," the doctor said. "I know what the doctor said." "Then what am I supposed to do? Run again? Hide somewhere else? And pray Cedric doesn't have friends in the next village too?" Her voice climbed toward panic, cracking on the edges. Lucien had seen this before. Desperation turning into reckless decisions. People making stupid moves because fear overwhelmed calculation. He stepped closer, and Eveline's back hit the wall. Not retreat, just physics. Lucien kept his voice low, forcing her to focus on his words instead of her terror. "You're not running," he said. "You're staying." Eveline's eyes widened. "Cedric has legal rights. The courts favor whoever has more power. And right now you're in my house, under my protection, which means Cedric's legal rights mean exactly nothing. You can't just ignore the law. Watch me." The certainty in his voice seemed to anchor her. Eveline's breathing slowed, her grip on the wall loosening slightly. But intelligence burned behind her fear, sharp questions forming faster than panic could suppress them. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Risk conflict with another aristocrat over a widow you barely know?" Lucien considered lying, claiming strategic advantage or political maneuvering. But Eveline had proven too perceptive for comfortable fiction. "Because men like Cedric think they own people," he said, quietly. "And I've spent 6 years proving that assumption wrong." It was true enough. The Iron Duke's reputation had been built on crushing aristocrats who confused power with permission. Cedric was exactly the type Lucien enjoyed destroying. But there was something else underneath that truth. Something Lucien wasn't ready to examine too closely. He liked having Eveline here, liked the way she'd brought this dead manor back to life, liked watching her challenge him without flinching, liked the idea of keeping her. "What's your plan?" Eveline asked. Lucien smiled, and it wasn't kind. "I'm going to give Lord Mercer exactly what he came for, a meeting with the widow. And then I'm going to make him regret every decision that led him to my door." "How?" "Let me worry about strategy. You focus on maintaining composure tomorrow. Can you do that?" Eveline straightened, her spine finding steel again. "Yes." "Good. Because Cedric will try to intimidate you, make you feel powerless. He'll use Oliver as leverage and your fear as a weapon. I've dealt with Cedric before." Not like this. Not with me standing behind you. The words came out possessive, territorial, exactly what Lucien had warned himself against. But he didn't take them back. Couldn't. Because the thought of Cedric Mercer anywhere near Evelyn or Oliver made something predatory wake up inside Lucien's chest. Something that didn't care about propriety or legal boundaries. Something that just wanted to protect what it claimed. Evelyn studied his face, and Lucien wondered what she saw there. The Duke? The monster? Or something more complicated that neither of them knew how to name. "Thank you," she said finally, "for this, for everything." "Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Mercer. Tomorrow might get ugly. I can handle ugly." "I know. That's why you're still here." He left before the conversation revealed anything else dangerous. Downstairs, Marcus had already assembled preliminary information on Cedric Mercer. Lucien read through it in his study while dawn light bled through windows. The reports painted exactly the picture he'd expected. Cedric was drowning in debt, hemorrhaging money on bad investments and expensive mistresses. Richard Mercer's estate had been his lifeline, and losing control of Oliver's inheritance had pushed him toward desperation. Desperate men made mistakes. Lucien just needed to engineer the right pressure points. He spent the day preparing, sent writers to London with specific instructions, called in favors from magistrates who owed him loyalty or feared his displeasure, arranged for certain financial documents to be expedited and delivered before nightfall. By the time Cedric arrived, Lucien would know every vulnerable angle the man possessed, and he'd exploit all of them. Evening brought Evelyn to his study door. She'd changed into a better dress, dark blue fabric that had probably been expensive once. Her hair was pinned up with careful precision, and exhaustion shadowed her eyes. "Oliver's asking for you," she said. Lucien looked up from his papers. "Why?" "I don't know. He won't tell me. Just insists he needs to talk to the Duke." Curiosity pulled Lucien upstairs. He found Oliver sitting cross-legged on his makeshift bed, surrounded by books from Thomas's collection. The boy looked serious, older than 7 had any right to be. "Your Grace," Oliver said formally, "I need to ask you something important." Lucien sat in the chair, mirroring the boy's gravity. "Ask." "Are you going to let my uncle take us away?" The directness was brutal. No cushioning, no childish evasion, just raw fear dressed in a question. "No," Lucien said, "I'm not." Oliver's shoulders dropped, relief flooding his small frame. "Mama's scared. She tries to hide it, but I can tell. Your mother is brave. Fear doesn't make someone weak. Will you protect her?" Lucien met the child's eyes. "Yes. Even if it's dangerous, especially then." Oliver nodded slowly, processing this with the careful consideration of someone who'd already learned that promises from powerful men could shatter. Then he reached under his blanket and pulled out a small wooden horse, worn smooth from handling. "My papa made this for me," Oliver said quietly, "before he got sick. It's the only thing I have left of him." He held it out toward Lucien. "I want you to keep it safe, in case Uncle Cedric tries to take it." The gesture was so trusting, so completely vulnerable, that Lucien felt something crack inside his chest. This child was offering him the most precious thing he owned, putting faith in a man he'd known less than a week. Lucien took the wooden horse carefully. Its weight was negligible, but the responsibility felt massive. "I'll keep it safe," he said, "and I'll keep you safe too. Both of you." Oliver's smile was small but real. "I believe you." After Oliver fell asleep, Lucien returned downstairs to find Evelyn in the entrance hall, directing servants through final preparations. The manor looked different now, not restored to former glory exactly, but alive. Functional, warm. She'd done this in 6 months. Alone. "Mrs. Mercer," Lucien called. Evelyn turned and he held out the wooden horse. "Your son gave me this for safekeeping." Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. "He what?" "Said he trusts me to protect it, and both of you." Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "That's his most precious possession. Richard carved it the month before he died." "I know. Oliver told me." Evelyn took a shaky breath. "And you accepted it?" "I gave my word." The weight of that statement hung between them. Lucien's word wasn't given lightly. Once spoken, it became law. Unbreakable. Absolute. Evelyn understood. He could see recognition dawning in her expression. "You're really going to fight Cedric," she said. "Not just posture, Actually fight, until he leaves or breaks. Whichever comes first. He could ruin you, spread scandal, turn the aristocracy against. Let him try. The confidence in Lucien's voice wasn't arrogance. It was arithmetic. He'd calculated every angle, prepared every countermove. Cedric was walking into an ambush disguised as a meeting. And Lucien was very, very good at ambushes. "Why are you doing this?" Evelyn asked again, and this time the question sounded different. Less confused, more afraid of the answer. Lucien looked at her standing in his entrance hall, surrounded by the restoration she'd built from nothing, and told the truth that scared him most. "Because this place finally feels like something other than a grave, and I'm not ready to let that go." The admission cost him. Lucien saw it land in Evelyn's expression, watched understanding bloom into something more complicated, something that looked dangerously close to hope. "Your Grace," she started, but he cut her off. "Get some rest, Mrs. Mercer. Tomorrow will be difficult." He left before she could respond, retreating to his study where strategy felt safer than whatever the hell was happening between them. Night stretched long. Lucien didn't sleep, just read reports and refined his approach. By dawn, he had everything mapped, every pressure point, every vulnerability, every weapon he'd need to dismantle Cedric Mercer. The aristocrat arrived exactly when Marcus's scouts predicted. Mid-afternoon, with enough daylight left for dramatic confrontation but not enough for extended negotiation. Tactical timing. Cedric had planned this carefully. Too bad Lucien had planned better. He watched from the library window as Cedric's carriage rolled up the Manor drive. Expensive vehicle. Armed riders. Legal representation visible through the windows. The man was preparing for war. Perfect. Lucien descended the main staircase slowly, letting his presence fill the entrance hall before Cedric even entered. Servants scattered to appropriate positions. Marcus stood ready with documents. Everything choreographed for maximum impact. The front doors opened and Cedric Mercer walked in like he owned the place. He was mid-40s, well-dressed, carrying himself with the casual arrogance of someone who'd never truly been challenged. His eyes swept the hall, cataloging value and weakness in equal measure. Then he saw Lucien, and his confidence stuttered. "Your Grace," Cedric said, recovering quickly. "I apologize for the unannounced visit. I'm searching for my sister-in-law and nephew. I have reason to believe they may have taken refuge here." Lucien didn't move from his position on the stairs. "Lord Mercer, what makes you think I'd harbor runaways?" "I don't presume to know your business, Your Grace, but Evelyn Mercer has been missing for 6 months, and my sources suggest she may have sought shelter in the Northern Territories." "Your sources are well informed." Hope flared in Cedric's eyes. "Then she is here?" "She and the boy are upstairs, recovering from illness." Lucien watched Cedric's expression shift through relief, calculation, and something uglier. Possession. Like he'd found misplaced property. "I must insist on seeing them immediately," Cedric said. "As Oliver's legal guardian." "You're not his guardian." The correction came out flat and absolute. Cedric's lawyers shifted uncomfortably. "My brother's will clearly states..." "Your brother's will names his widow as guardian until Oliver reaches majority. I've reviewed the documents. They're quite specific." Cedric's jaw tightened. "Eveline is unfit to raise the child alone. She has no resources, no protection, no proper household. She has all three now." The statement landed like a bomb. Cedric stared at Lucien, confusion warring with anger. "I don't understand, Your Grace. Mrs. Mercer manages my household. In exchange, she and Oliver receive room, board, and my protection. It's a standard employment arrangement." Lucien's voice stayed conversational, almost bored, but every word was chosen for maximum impact. "You can't seriously..." "I can and have. Mrs. Mercer has proven exceptionally capable at restoring this estate. I have no intention of terminating her employment." Cedric's composure finally cracked. "This is absurd. She's a widow with no standing, no family, nothing. You're a duke. You can't possibly..." "Can I?" The two words dropped the temperature in the hall by 10 degrees. Lucien descended the final stairs slowly, and Cedric actually took a step back. "You came to my home," Lucien said quietly, "demanding I surrender employees who work under my protection. You brought lawyers and armed men like I'm some minor lord you can intimidate. And now you're telling me what I can and cannot do with my own household." The silence that followed was suffocating. Cedric's face went red. With all respect, Your Grace, this woman has been filling your head with lies. I'm Oliver's blood relative. I have every right. You have what I permit you to have. Nothing more. Footsteps on the stairs. Lucien didn't turn, but he knew Evelyn was descending. He could feel her presence like heat against his back. Cedric saw her and lunged forward. Evelyn, thank God. I've been searching everywhere. Come, we're leaving immediately. Evelyn stopped beside Lucien. And he felt rather than saw her straighten her spine. I'm not going anywhere with you, Cedric. Don't be ridiculous. You can't possibly. I'm employed here. My son is recovering under proper medical care. We have everything we need. Cedric's expression twisted into something ugly. You think hiding behind a duke will protect you? The moment you step outside these walls, I'll have magistrates waiting. I'll claim custody of Oliver and see you charged with child endangerment. Lucien moved then. Just one step forward, but it was enough to make Cedric's lawyers physically retreat. You'll do nothing, Lucien said, because if you attempt legal action against Mrs. Mercer or her son, I will personally ensure that every debt you've accumulated over the past 5 years comes due simultaneously. The color drained from Cedric's face. You can't. I own most of them. Marcus, show Lord Mercer the documents. His steward produced a folder thick with papers. Property loans. Personal debts. Business investments gone sour. Every financial mistake Cedric had made over half a decade, purchased quietly through Blackthorn proxies. Cedric stared at the papers like they were a death sentence. Because they were. You've been buying my debts, he whispered, diversifying my portfolio. Good business practice. This is extortion. This is economics. You attempted to seize assets that don't belong to you. I'm simply ensuring you understand the cost of that decision. Lucien watched understanding dawn in Cedric's eyes. The trap had been set weeks ago, triggered the moment the man started asking questions about Evelyn's location. I could go to the courts, Cedric said desperately. Expose this manipulation. You could try. But magistrates tend to favor dukes over indebted aristocrats, especially when the duke in question controls half the northern territories and personally knows every judge in London. It was a bluff. Partially. Lucien's influence was extensive but not unlimited, but Cedric didn't know that, and fear filled the gaps knowledge left empty. What do you want? Cedric asked finally. Leave. Don't contact Mrs. Mercer or her son again. Sign custody rights over to his mother permanently. And if I refuse? Then I call your debts tomorrow morning. You'll be bankrupt by week's end. Cedric looked at Evelyn with pure hatred. This is your doing. You seduced him somehow. Convinced. Evelyn's hand cracked across Cedric's face so fast Lucien almost missed it. The slap echoed through the hall like a gunshot. I did nothing, Evelyn said, her voice shaking with rage, except protect my son from a man who saw him as leverage instead of family. You lost, Cedric. Accept it. Cedric raised his hand, and Lucien moved. He caught Cedric's wrist mid-swing, his grip iron. The aristocrat gasped in pain, trying to pull free, but Lucien held him effortlessly. Touch her and die, Lucien said quietly. I'll make it look like an accident. No one will question it. The threat was real. Cedric heard it in Lucien's voice, saw it in his eyes, and something inside him broke. Fine, he whispered. Fine. I'll sign whatever you want. Just let me go. Lucien released him, and Cedric stumbled backward. Marcus produced new documents, already prepared. Cedric signed them with shaking hands while his lawyers watched in silent horror. When it was done, Lucien gestured toward the door. Get out of my house. Cedric fled. His lawyers followed. Within minutes, the carriage was rolling back down the drive, disappearing into northern mist. The entrance hall fell silent. Evelyn stood frozen, her hand still raised from the slap, breathing hard. Lucien watched her process what had just happened. The confrontation, the threat, the victory. Then she started crying. Not delicate tears, full wrenching sobs that shook her entire frame. Lucien had no idea what to do. Comfort wasn't his strength. He built empires and crushed enemies. Handling emotional women was entirely outside his expertise. But Evelyn's legs gave out. An instinct moved faster than thought. Lucien caught her before she hit the floor, his arms wrapping around her shoulders. She collapsed against his chest, crying into his coat, while he stood there awkwardly, trying to remember if he'd ever held anyone like this before. He's gone, Evelyn whispered between sobs. He's really gone. Yes. Oliver's safe. Yes, we're safe. As long as you stay here, Lucian said quietly. Yes. Evelyn pulled back slightly, looking up at him with tear-streaked cheeks. Why did you do that? Risk so much for us? Lucien looked down at her. This woman who'd rebuilt his brother's manor and challenged his authority and somehow made him care about things beyond power and reputation. The honest answer terrified him, because somewhere between arriving at this estate and now, Evelyn and Oliver had stopped being complications and become something else. Something he wanted to keep. But saying that out loud felt like admitting weakness, like handing someone a weapon they could use to destroy him. So instead he said, because I don't lose? Ever. It was true, just not the whole truth. Evelyn seemed to understand. She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes, rebuilding the composure that had cracked under pressure. Thank you, she said, for everything. Don't thank me yet. We still need to formalize your employment properly. What does that mean? It means you're not leaving. Not in 3 days, not when the estate sells. You and Oliver stay as permanent household staff. The words came out before Lucian fully processed them. But once spoken, he didn't take them back. Evelyn stared at him. You're canceling the sale? Postponing indefinitely. This estate requires extensive restoration. You've proven capable of managing that work. And when it's done, then we'll see. It was the same non-answer he'd given Oliver. The same avoidance of commitment that kept his options open. But Evelyn heard what he didn't say, saw past the strategic justification to the truth underneath. You want us to stay, she said softly. I want the manor restored properly. That's not what I asked. Lucien's jaw tightened. No, it's not. The admission hung between them, dangerous and electric. Evelyn's expression shifted into something complex. Gratitude mixed with fear, mixed with something that looked dangerously like hope. Your Grace, Oliver's voice called down from upstairs. Mama? Is Uncle Cedric gone? Evelyn broke away from Lucien immediately, climbing the stairs to reassure her son. Lucien watched her go, then turned to Marcus, who'd been standing at professional distance throughout the entire confrontation. Cancel the sale completely, Lucien said, and prepare permanent employment contracts for Mrs. Mercer and her son. Your Grace, are you certain? The financial situation? I'll handle it another way. The manor stays. Marcus nodded, wise enough not to question further. Very good, Your Grace. After the steward left, Lucien stood alone in the entrance hall, listening to Evelyn's voice drift down from upstairs. She was telling Oliver they were safe, that they could stay, that everything would be all right. Lucien hoped that was true, because he'd just made a decision that the aristocracy would call madness, keeping a widow and child, canceling a profitable sale, letting sentiment override strategy. The Iron Duke didn't do sentiment, except apparently he did now. That night, after Oliver was asleep, Evelyn found Lucien in the library. He was reorganizing books the way she'd started before Cedric's arrival, following Thomas's system of thematic resonance. You remembered, Evelyn said from the doorway. Lucien didn't look up. You said my brother's collection deserved better than alphabetical sorting. You were right. She moved into the room, her footsteps soft against carpet. Can we talk? About what? About what happens now? Lucien finally looked at her. You stay, you work, we restore the manor. It's straightforward. Is it? It should be. But Evelyn didn't look convinced. The problem, Your Grace, is that I don't think either of us believes that's all this is anymore. The observation hit too close to truth. Lucien set down the book he'd been holding. What do you want me to say, Mrs. Mercer? That I've developed inconvenient attachments? That keeping you here is about more than household management? Yes. The bluntness startled him. Lucien was used to people dancing around dangerous subjects, wrapping honesty in polite fiction. Evelyn just demanded truth. I don't know what this is, Lucien admitted. I came here to sell everything and leave. Instead, I'm keeping the estate, employing you permanently, and threatening aristocrats over custody disputes. None of that was planned. But you're not sorry you did it? No, I'm not. Evelyn studied his face with that unsettling perception she possessed. You're afraid, she said quietly. I don't do fear. Everyone does fear, Your Grace. They just call it different things. Strategy, calculation, risk assessment. Lucien's hands curled into fists. What exactly do you think I'm afraid of? That if you admit you care about us, something terrible will happen. Like it did with your brother. The words landed like a physical blow. Lucien felt his carefully maintained walls crack, and suddenly he was furious. You don't know anything about my brother. I know you loved him. I know he died and you blamed yourself. I know you abandoned this entire estate because being here hurt too much. Stop. I know you're terrified that if you let yourself care again, you'll lose again. I said stop. Eveline didn't. She stepped closer, refusing to back down even when Lucien's expression promised violence. But here's what I know that you don't, Your Grace. Running from pain doesn't make it disappear. It just means you carry it alone. Lucien grabbed her shoulders. Not rough but firm, forcing her to stop talking. His face was inches from hers. Anger and something more complicated burning in his chest. You want honesty? Fine. Yes, I care. Yes, I want you here. Yes, the thought of you and Oliver leaving makes me feel things I haven't felt in 6 years. Happy now? Eveline's expression softened. Are you? The question broke something inside him. Lucien released her and turned away, his breathing harsh in the library's silence. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Building things, protecting people. I'm good at that. But this? Caring without controlling, wanting without possessing? I have no idea how. Then we'll figure it out together. Lucien looked back at her. Why? Why risk trusting someone like me? Because I've seen who you are beneath the reputation. And I think you're tired of being the Iron Duke all the time. The observation was too accurate, too dangerous, and too late to deny. Lucien moved toward Eveline slowly, giving her time to retreat. She didn't. Just stood there watching him approach with steady eyes. When he reached her, he lifted one hand to her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. Her skin was warm, soft, completely at odds with the steel he knew she carried inside. If we do this, Lucien said quietly, if I let myself want this, you need to understand something. What? I don't share. Ever. You'll be mine in every way that matters, and I'll destroy anyone who tries to take you away. Eveline's breath caught. That sounds like possession, not partnership. It is possession. I'm trying to be honest about what I am, and if I refuse, then tell me now. Before this goes somewhere neither of us can take back. For several seconds, Eveline didn't answer. Lucien waited, preparing himself for rejection, for the sensible decision any rational woman would make. Instead, Eveline rose on her toes and kissed him. It wasn't gentle, wasn't tentative. It was 6 months of fear and isolation and desperate hope poured into contact. Lucien responded instinctively, his hand sliding into her hair, his other arm wrapping around her waist and pulling her against him. The kiss deepened, and rational thought dissolved into pure sensation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Eveline looked up at him with eyes that held no fear. I'm not afraid of your darkness, Your Grace. I've survived my own. Lucien pressed his forehead against hers. This is insane. The aristocracy will crucify us. Let them try. You'll be ruined. Socially destroyed. I've been ruined before. I survived. Oliver adores you. He told me so. Lucien pulled back slightly. The boy shouldn't trust me this easily. It's dangerous. Maybe. Or maybe he recognizes something you don't. What? That beneath all the ruthlessness and control, you're still capable of love. The word made Lucien's chest tighten. He wanted to deny it. Wanted to claim this was just attraction or strategy or anything other than the terrifying truth. But Eveline was looking at him like she already knew, like she'd seen past every defense he'd built. This changes everything, Lucien said. I know. The aristocracy will use it against us. I know. Cedric might come back with allies. Then we'll destroy him together. The certainty in her voice should have scared him. Instead, it felt like coming home. Lucien kissed her again, slower this time, tasting possibility and risk in equal measure. When he pulled back, his decision was made. Tomorrow, we announce your permanent employment. In 1 month, after the estate is more stable, we announce our engagement. Eveline's eyes went wide. Engagement? You said you wanted partnership. Marriage is the only way to protect you legally from men like Cedric. And if I say no? Do you? Eveline studied his face for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, she smiled. Ask me properly, Your Grace. Not as strategy, as yourself. Lucien felt something crack inside his chest. The Iron Duke who never knelt, who commanded armies and crushed rebellion without mercy. He dropped to one knee in the library where his brother used to read. Evelyn Mercer, will you marry me? Not for protection or politics, because I want you here, because you made this tomb breathe again, because I'm tired of being alone. Yes, Evelyn whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Lucian stood, pulling her into his arms, and for the first time in 6 years, the weight on his shoulders felt manageable. But outside the manor walls, in London's aristocratic circles, news was already spreading. The Iron Duke had taken a widow into his household, and the kingdom was about to learn what happened when powerful men finally chose heart over empire. The point of no return had arrived, and neither of them was walking back. The engagement announcement hit London's aristocracy like a cannon through silk. Within 48 hours, every drawing room in the kingdom was dissecting the scandal. Duke Lucien Blackthorne, the Iron Duke himself, engaged to a penniless widow with a child. Not a political alliance, not a strategic merger, just a woman who'd been living in his isolated manor for months. The rumors wrote themselves. Lucien read the gossip sheets in his study while dawn broke over Blackthorne Manor. Marcus stood nearby, his face carefully neutral as he delivered the morning reports. The London Post calls it unprecedented, Marcus said. The Evening Chronicle suggests Mrs. Mercer must possess extraordinary talents to have captured your attention so completely. The euphemism wasn't subtle. Let them talk, Lucian said, setting down the papers. Words don't change facts. No, Your Grace, but the Privy Council has requested your presence in London. They're concerned about the optics. Tell them I'm occupied with estate business. They insisted it wasn't optional. Lucian's jaw tightened. Everything was optional when you held enough power. But the Privy Council represented the king's interests, and ignoring them completely would create problems he didn't need. Fine, schedule it for next week. I'll deal with their concerns personally. After Marcus left, Lucian moved to the window overlooking the gardens. Evelyn was out there with Oliver, showing him how to identify winter plants. The boy laughed at something she said, his voice carrying through the cold air. 3 weeks since the engagement. 3 weeks of watching Eveline transform not just the manor, but something inside Lucian's chest. She challenged him constantly, refused to let him retreat into cold authority, made him feel things he'd buried alongside Thomas. It terrified him, but not enough to stop. The sound of hooves on gravel pulled his attention, a rider approaching fast, mud-splattered and urgent. Lucian recognized the Ravenspire colors immediately. Something was wrong. He met the messenger in the entrance hall. The man dismounted with military precision, exhaustion evident in every movement. Your Grace, urgent news from your northern holdings. There's been an incident. What kind of incident? Lord Ashford's son was caught smuggling contraband through your territories. When your guards attempted arrest, he resisted. There was violence. 2 of your men are dead. Lucien felt ice settle in his veins. Ashford. One of the most powerful lords in the northern territories. Technically an ally, but always ambitious. His son getting caught in criminal activity wasn't coincidence. It was a test. Where's the son now? In custody at Ravenspire. But Lord Ashford is demanding his immediate release. He's threatening to bring the matter before the king if you don't comply. Of course he was, because releasing this boy would make Lucian look weak, but executing justice would create a political enemy at the worst possible time. This wasn't random. This was calculated pressure. Tell Ravenspire to hold him, Lucian ordered. No release without my direct authorization, and send word to Lord Ashford that I'll address the matter personally when I return. When will that be? Your Grace? The messenger's question hung in the air. Lucian glanced toward the window where Evelyn and Oliver were still visible in the gardens. Leaving now meant abandoning them during the most vulnerable period. The engagement was public, but not yet formalized. Evelyn had no legal protection if something happened while he was gone, but staying meant letting the Northern Territories spiral into chaos. 2 dead guards, a lord's son in custody. The kind of situation that exploded if left unattended. Power demanded presence. And Lucien had been absent too long. 2 days, he said finally. I'll depart for Ravenspire in 2 days. After the messenger left, Lucian found Evelyn in the library. She was cataloging Thomas's book collection, creating an inventory system that made sense only to her, but worked beautifully. She looked up when he entered, and her smile faded instantly. Something's wrong. I need to return to Ravenspire. There's been trouble in the Northern Territories. How long will you be gone? A week, maybe 2. Evelyn set down her pen carefully. The Privy Council meeting is in 6 days. I'll handle it from Ravenspire if necessary. And us? You'll be safe here. I'm leaving additional guards, and Marcus will remain to oversee estate security. Evelyn stood, moving around the desk to face him directly. That's not what I meant. I meant us. What happens to our engagement while you're dealing with political crises and dead guards? Lucian pulled her close, his hand settling on her waist. Nothing changes. We announce the formal betrothal when I return. The aristocracy will use your absence against us. Let them. I've survived worse than gossip. But Evelyn looked unconvinced. The doubt in her eyes made Lucien's chest tighten. 3 weeks together, and already she could read him too well, could see past his certainty to the calculation underneath. You're worried, she said quietly. I'm cautious. There's a difference. Lucian. He kissed her instead of answering, pouring reassurance into contact because words felt inadequate. When they broke apart, Evelyn's expression had softened but not surrendered. Promise me you'll come back. I always keep my promises. That night, Lucian held her in his bed while moonlight cut through the windows. Evelyn slept against his chest, her breathing deep and even. Oliver was in the next room, safe behind walls Lucian had reinforced specifically for this purpose. Everything should have felt secure. Instead, unease crawled up his spine. The timing of Ashford's son getting caught. The Privy Council's sudden interest. The gossip sheet's coordinated attack on Evelyn's reputation. Individually, each incident made sense. Together they felt orchestrated. But by whom? And why now? Lucian spent the remaining hours before dawn reviewing intelligence reports, searching for patterns. By the time gray light bled across the horizon, he'd found nothing concrete, just instinct screaming that something was coming. He left for Ravenspire at dawn. Evelyn and Oliver stood in the manor entrance, watching him mount his horse. The boy looked worried, but Evelyn's face was carefully composed. 2 weeks, Lucian said, then I'm back permanently. We'll be here. The confidence in her voice steadied him. Lucien nodded once, then spurred his horse forward before sentiment could override strategy. The ride to Ravenspire took 8 hours through freezing rain. By the time Lucien arrived, exhaustion had settled into his bones. But his steward was waiting with updates, and rest would have to wait. Lord Ashford's son is in the East Tower, the steward reported. He's demanding release and threatening legal action for unlawful imprisonment. What evidence do we have? Contraband goods seized during arrest. Witness testimony from 3 separate sources. And correspondence suggesting he was working with smuggling networks that operate across multiple territories. Solid evidence, which meant releasing the boy was impossible without destroying Lucien's authority completely. Prepare a formal hearing, Lucien ordered. I want every piece of evidence documented and presented before neutral magistrates. Lord Ashford can attend and present his defense. He'll refuse. Call it biased. Then he proves his guilt through absence. Either way, we proceed with justice. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. In the meantime, Lucien handled the accumulated crises that always piled up during his absences. Trade disputes, land conflicts, noble families trying to expand their influence through questionable means. The northern territories required constant pressure to maintain order. Lucien provided it with ruthless efficiency, crushing challenges before they metastasized into rebellion. By the second day, he was starting to believe the situation was manageable. Then the letter arrived from London. Marcus's handwriting, urgent seal. Lucien opened it in his private study, and the first line made his blood freeze. Your Grace, Lady Cordelia Ashford arrived at Blackthorn Manor this morning with documents from the Privy Council. She claims authority to investigate Mrs. Mercer's fitness as your potential duchess. I attempted to refuse entry, but she has legal authorization bearing the king's seal. Lucien read the rest through mounting rage. Lady Cordelia was Lord Ashford's sister, a vicious aristocrat known for destroying reputations through strategic scandal. Her sudden interest in Eveline wasn't coincidence. It was revenge. Ashford had engineered this perfectly. Get his son arrested to pull Lucien away from Blackthorn Manor. Then send his sister to attack Evelyn while Lucien was too distant to intervene immediately. The political trap was elegant. If Lucien abandoned the hearing and rushed back, he'd look weak. If he stayed, Evelyn faced interrogation alone. He was already mounting his horse before conscious thought caught up with instinct. The ride back to Blackthorn Manor took 6 hours of brutal pace. Lucien's horse was foaming by the time they reached the estate gates, and he didn't slow until he hit the entrance hall. Lady Cordelia sat in Thomas's favorite chair like she owned it. Evelyn stood across from her, spine straight but face pale. Oliver was nowhere visible. Marcus hovered nearby, clearly uncertain whether to intervene or maintain protocol. Lucien's entrance made everyone freeze. "Your Grace," Lady Cordelia said smoothly, standing with practiced grace. "How unexpected. I thought you were occupied in Ravenspire." "Where's Oliver?" Lucien demanded, ignoring her completely. Evelyn's voice was steady, despite obvious strain. "Upstairs with the governess. I didn't want him present for this." "Present for what?" Lady Cordelia's smile was poisonous. "Present while I verify whether his mother is suitable for the position she's attempting to claim. The Privy Council has concerns, Your Grace. Surely you understand their desire for thorough vetting." Lucien moved to stand beside Evelyn, his presence a physical barrier between her and Cordelia. "The Privy Council doesn't investigate my personal affairs. They do when those affairs impact the kingdom's stability. A duke's marriage isn't private, Your Grace. It's political. My engagement is none of your concern, Lady Cordelia. But it is the king's concern, and he requested I conduct preliminary interviews to assess Mrs. Mercer's background. The lie was smooth but obvious. Kings didn't waste time on individual engagements, but proving it was a lie meant challenging royal authority, which would create more problems than it solved. Cordelia had chosen her weapon well. "I've been asking Mrs. Mercer about her late husband's debts," Cordelia continued. "There seem to be significant irregularities in the estate accounting. Some might call it fraud." Evelyn's breathing went shallow, but she didn't break eye contact. "My husband's brother handled the accounts after Richard died. Any irregularities should be directed to Cedric Mercer. Convenient that Lord Cedric recently signed away his rights to your son's guardianship." Almost as if that signature was obtained under duress. It wasn't duress. It was negotiation, conducted by a duke with substantial leverage over a financially vulnerable lord. The optics are concerning. Lucien's hands curled into fists. "You've made your point, Lady Cordelia. Now leave my house." "I'm afraid I can't do that, Your Grace. The investigation is ongoing, and I have authorization to remain until it's complete." She produced documents bearing official seals. Lucien scanned them quickly, rage building with each line. The authorization was real, limited but enforceable. Challenging it would require going through legal channels that would take weeks. Cordelia had trapped him in bureaucracy. "How long?" Lucien asked coldly. "The investigation?" "As long as necessary." "Days, perhaps weeks." "Get out." "Your Grace, I have legal authority." I said get out. The command dropped the temperature in the room by 20 degrees. Marcus actually stepped back. Evelyn's eyes went wide, but Cordelia held her ground. "If you force me to leave, I'll report to the Privy Council that you obstructed a royal investigation. The consequences would be severe." Lucien stepped closer and Cordelia's composure finally cracked slightly. "Test me," he said quietly. "See what happens when you threaten things I've claimed as mine." For 3 seconds, silence held. Then Cordelia's smile returned, colder than before. "You've changed, Your Grace." The Iron Duke, I knew, wouldn't jeopardize his position over a widow. The Iron Duke you knew didn't have anything worth protecting beyond power. Things change, clearly, which is precisely why the investigation is necessary. She gathered her papers with deliberate slowness, making it clear she was leaving by choice, not force. At the door, she paused. "One more thing, Your Grace. I took the liberty of interviewing several servants about Mrs. Mercer's conduct during your absence. Their testimony was quite illuminating." "What testimony?" "Ask your steward. I'm sure he'll share the details." She left before Lucien could respond. The entrance hall fell silent except for the sound of her carriage departing. Lucien turned to Marcus. "What testimony?" The steward's face had gone gray. "Your Grace, I can explain." "Explain what?" Lady Cordelia convinced 3 servants to sign statements suggesting Mrs. Mercer had been entertaining male visitors while you were in Ravenspire. The words landed like physical blows. Lucien felt rage and something worse flood his system. Not quite doubt, but close enough to taste. "Is it true?" he asked Evelyn directly. Her face went white. "No, absolutely not." "Then who were the visitors?" The village doctor came twice to check on Oliver, and Marcus brought the architect to discuss repairs. That's all. Marcus nodded quickly. I can verify both visits, Your Grace. They were entirely professional and conducted in my presence. But the servants signed statements saying otherwise, because Lady Cordelia paid them to lie. Evelyn's voice climbed toward desperation. She offered them money and threatened their positions if they refused. I watched her do it. Lucian wanted to believe her. Every instinct screamed that Cordelia was manufacturing evidence, weaponizing servants against their mistress. But a small, poisonous voice whispered doubt. 3 servants. Independent statements, all suggesting impropriety during his absence. What if he'd been wrong about Evelyn? What if desperation had driven her to secure backup options? What if... No. Lucian crushed the doubt before it could metastasize. He knew Evelyn, had watched her rebuild this manor with nothing but determination, had seen her protect Oliver with absolute devotion. She wasn't capable of the deception Cordelia suggested, but the aristocracy would believe it anyway, because scandals about widows seducing powerful men confirmed every prejudice they already held. I believe you, Lucian said quietly. Evelyn's relief was visible. Thank you. But belief doesn't matter. The damage is done. What do you mean? Cordelia has statements. False or not, they exist. She'll present them to the Privy Council as evidence you're unfit. The scandal will destroy your reputation before we can disprove the claims. Then we fight back. We expose her lies. With what evidence? Our word against signed testimony? You could force the servants to recant. Lucien shook his head. Coerced recantations look worse than the original statements. It would confirm every suspicion about me using power to manipulate outcomes. Evelyn's expression shifted from relief to horror as understanding dawned. You're saying we can't win this. I'm saying the game is rigged. Cordelia built a trap we can't escape through conventional means. Then use unconventional means. You're the Iron Duke. Iron. You've crushed bigger threats than one aristocratic woman, not without consequences. Every action I take against Cordelia will be framed as a powerful man silencing his victim. The more I fight, the worse we look. So what? We just surrender? The question hung between them like a blade. Lucien looked at Evelyn standing in his entrance hall, surrounded by the restoration she'd built, and felt something crack inside his chest. This was the price of caring, of letting someone matter beyond strategic value. Vulnerability disguised as love. No, he said finally, we don't surrender, but we adapt. How? I don't know yet. That night, Lucien sat in his study reading through Cordelia's investigation documents. Each page was a masterclass in character assassination disguised as objective inquiry. Questions about Evelyn's finances, her late husband's debts, her sudden appearance at Blackthorn Manor, her relationship with Oliver's uncle, all framed to suggest calculation instead of desperation. Marcus entered without knocking, his face grim. Your Grace, there's something you need to see. He laid a letter on the desk. The seal was from Lord Ashford himself. Lucian opened it, and rage turned to cold calculation as he read. The letter was simple. A proposal. Ashford would withdraw his sister's investigation and suppress the servant testimony. He'd publicly support Lucien's engagement and ensure the Privy Council had no concerns. In exchange, Lucian would release Ashford's son without punishment and grant the family expanded trade rights in the Northern Territories. A deal dressed as mercy. Lucian read it twice, searching for hidden clauses or loopholes. But the proposal was straightforward. Ashford wanted his son back and more power. He was willing to destroy Evelyn's reputation to force Lucian's compliance. Classic aristocratic negotiation. Identify your opponent's weakness. Apply pressure. Extract concessions. It would have worked perfectly on the Iron Duke Lucien used to be. The man who valued power above sentiment, who never let personal attachments override strategic advantage. But that man was dead, killed by a widow who cleaned his brother's portrait, and a boy who trusted him with wooden horses. Your Grace, Marcus asked carefully, what will you do? Lucien set down the letter. Send a reply to Lord Ashford. Tell him his son will face trial according to law. Tell him I don't negotiate with men who threaten my household. And tell him that if his sister isn't gone from my estate by dawn, I'll have her physically removed regardless of legal authorization. That will start a war. Then let it start. Marcus's eyes widened. Your Grace, The Privy Council will side with Ashford. The king himself might. I don't care. But the consequences are mine to handle. Send the letter. After Marcus left, Lucian remained in his study, staring at Ashford's proposal. The smart play was obvious. Accept the deal. Protect Evelyn by removing the threat. Sacrifice principle for pragmatic victory. He'd built an empire making choices exactly like that. But Evelyn's voice echoed in his memory. I'm not afraid of your darkness. I've survived my own. She'd trusted him with everything. Her safety, her son, her heart. And Lucien had promised to protect them. Not through compromise, through strength. He found Evelyn in the library, sitting in darkness beside the dying fire. She looked up when he entered, and the exhaustion in her eyes made him ache. Cordelia's investigation will destroy me, Evelyn said quietly. You know that, don't you? Lucian sat beside her. Yes, the Privy Council will force you to choose. Your position or me? Probably. And you'll choose your position, because that's what powerful men do. The certainty in her voice cut deeper than doubt ever could. Lucien took her hand, feeling her pulse against his palm. 6 months ago, you would have been right, he said. I would have calculated the cost and chosen power without hesitation. But now I'm choosing you. Evelyn's breath caught. What does that mean? It means I sent Ashford a refusal. His son stands trial. Cordelia leaves or faces removal. And if the Privy Council demands I abandon our engagement, I'll tell them to go to hell. You can't do that. They'll strip your titles, your lands, everything you've built. Lucien suds and pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. I built an empire alone, Evelyn. I can rebuild one with you. The words should have felt insane, reckless, the kind of decision that destroyed dynasties. Instead, they felt inevitable. Because somewhere between arriving at Blackthorn Manor and now, Lucien had stopped being just the Iron Duke. He'd become something more complicated, something human, something capable of choosing love over power. I'm afraid, Evelyn whispered. So am I. What if we lose everything? Then we lose it together. He kissed her while the fire died and dawn approached. Outside, Cordelia's carriage would be preparing to leave. Ashford would be reading Lucian's refusal. The Privy Council would be drafting summons. War was coming. But Lucien had faced war before. He'd crushed rebellion and bankrupted enemies and ruled the northern territories through sheer ruthless will. This time, he wouldn't be fighting for power. He'd be fighting for something that actually mattered. 3 days later, the Privy Council's summons arrived. Formal. Unavoidable. Lucien was ordered to appear in London within the week to address concerns about his fitness to hold the dukedom. The charges were vague but damning: abuse of authority, improper conduct, association with unsuitable persons. All code for one thing: choosing Evelyn over the aristocracy's approval. Marcus read the summons with visible dread. Your Grace, this is catastrophic. If you refuse to attend, I'll attend. And your defense? The truth. I'm engaged to Mrs. Mercer. I refuse to abandon her. And if that costs me everything, so be it. They'll destroy you. Lucien looked out the window at Evelyn teaching Oliver to ride in the estate grounds. The boy was laughing, completely trusting, while his mother guided the horse with patient care. The Iron Duke would have called it weakness, called them liabilities, called the whole situation a distraction from real power. But watching them, Lucien felt something he hadn't experienced in 6 years. Peace. Let them try, he said quietly. I've survived worse. The night before he left for London, Lucien found Oliver in the library. The boy was reading by candlelight, completely absorbed in whatever adventure the pages described. Your Grace, Oliver said, looking up. Mama says you're going to the capital. For a little while. She says the nobles are angry about your engagement. Some of them, yes. Oliver set down his book. Are you going to give up? Let them win? The question was so direct, so completely without guile, that Lucien felt his throat tighten. No, he said. I'm going to fight. Good. Mama needs you. And so do I. The simple faith in Oliver's voice was devastating. This child had already lost one father, already survived one man's death. And now he was trusting Lucien not to abandon him too. The weight of that trust was crushing. I gave you my word, Lucien said quietly. I keep my promises. I know, that's why I'm not scared. Lucien looked at this small boy who'd somehow become his son in everything but blood, and made a decision that terrified him more than any political crisis. When I returned from London, we're leaving Blackthorn Manor. Oliver's eyes went wide. Forever? For a while, until things settle. We'll take your mother somewhere safe, somewhere the aristocracy can't reach. Where? Lucien smiled slightly. I have properties they don't know about, places where titles don't matter, and power is measured differently. And you'd really leave everything? For you and your mother? Yes. Oliver launched himself across the space between them, wrapping small arms around Lucien's waist in a fierce hug. The trust in that embrace made Lucien's chest ache. He held the boy carefully, feeling the weight of responsibility settle across his shoulders like iron. This was what mattered. Not kingdoms or territories, not aristocratic approval or political alliances. Just this. Protection, family, love. Everything he'd forgotten how to value. Everything Evelyn had taught him to reclaim. When Oliver finally released him and returned to his reading, Lucien went to find Evelyn. She was in their bedroom, packing supplies for his journey to London. Don't pack much, Lucien said. I'm not staying long. What if they demand extended hearings? Then they'll demand without me. Evelyn turned to face him. You're planning something. I'm planning survival. For all of us. He explained his decision. The plan to leave Blackthorn Manor. The properties held under false names where they could disappear if necessary. The financial arrangements that would sustain them even if the Privy Council stripped his titles. Evelyn listened without interruption, her expression shifting from shock to understanding. You'd give up everything, she said finally. Your position, your power, your entire life. My entire life was empty before you, Lucien corrected. I was just too stubborn to admit it. But the kingdom needs you. The northern territories will survive without me. Or they won't. Either way, I'm done sacrificing what matters for what's expected. Evelyn crossed the room and took his face in her hands. When did the Iron Duke become such a romantic? When a widow refused to kneel and rebuilt his brother's library instead. She kissed him, and Lucien tasted salt. Tears he hadn't realized she was crying. I love you, Evelyn whispered. I probably shouldn't. It's too fast, too dangerous, too impossible. But I do. The confession made something inside Lucien's chest crack completely. He'd spent 6 years building walls against feeling, against attachment, against the vulnerability that came with loving someone enough to be destroyed by their loss. And now those walls were rubble. I love you too, he said, and I'm not losing you. Not to the Privy Council, not to scandal, not to anything. Even if it costs you everything, especially then, because the man who'd arrived at Blackthorn Manor 6 weeks ago would have chosen power without hesitation, would have calculated the cost of keeping Evelyn and decided it exceeded acceptable risk. But that man was dead, killed by a woman who saw him as human instead of monster, and Lucien wasn't bringing him back. The morning he left for London, Evelyn and Oliver stood in the entrance hall watching him prepare. Marcus had already departed with advanced security. The household staff moved through their duties with careful silence. Everyone understood what was happening. The Duke was going to war against his own class, and he might not survive. 2 weeks, Lucien told Evelyn. Then I'm back regardless of outcome. And if they arrest you, they won't. I still have enough power to prevent that. And if they strip your titles? Then I come home as Lucien instead of Duke. Either way, I come home. He kissed her slowly, aware of servants watching, not caring. Let them gossip. Let the aristocracy clutch their pearls. Let the whole kingdom judge. Lucien had spent his entire life being what others demanded. Now he was choosing what he wanted. The ride to London took 3 days through winter storms that matched his mood. By the time Lucien arrived at his London residence, news of the Privy Council summons had spread throughout the capital. The aristocracy was salivating. The Iron Duke brought low by a widow. It was the kind of scandal that defined seasons, that ruined reputations, that reminded powerful men what happened when sentiment overrode strategy. Lucien's hearing was scheduled for 2 days after his arrival. He spent that time reviewing evidence, preparing defenses, calling in every favor and alliance he'd accumulated over decades. But as he worked, doubt crept in. Not about Evelyn, never about her, about himself. Because fighting the Privy Council meant fighting the king's authority, and even the Iron Duke couldn't win that battle through force alone. He needed something more. Leverage, blackmail, Evidence. Something to shift the balance before they destroyed him completely. The night before the hearing, a knock came at his study door. Lucian opened it, expecting his lawyer. Instead, Lord Cedric Mercer stood there, rain-soaked and desperate. "Your Grace," Cedric gasped. "I need your help." Lucian almost slammed the door, but something in Cedric's expression stopped him. Not calculation. Terror. "What happened?" "Ashford found out I signed custody rights over to Evelyn. He's threatening to reveal fraudulent transactions I conducted with his business partners. If he does, I'll be ruined, arrested, destroyed." "Good. Please. I know I don't deserve mercy, but I'm asking anyway. Help me, and I'll give you something you need. And what could you possibly offer me?" "Evidence," Cedric said. "Against Ashford, against Cordelia, against half the Privy Council members who are coming after you tomorrow." Lucian studied the broken aristocrat standing in his doorway. Cedric had threatened Eveline, had tried to steal Oliver, had embodied everything Lucian despised about entitled nobles using law as weapon, and now he was offering betrayal of his own class. "Why?" Lucian asked. "Why turn on them?" "Because they're going to destroy you," Cedric said quietly, "and if they succeed, they'll come for Evelyn and Oliver next. I may be a bastard, Your Grace, but I'm not a monster. I won't let them hurt that child." The admission hung in the air. Lucian made his decision. "Come in," he said, "and tell me everything." What Cedric revealed over the next 3 hours shattered Lucian's understanding of the forces arrayed against him. Ashford wasn't acting alone. He'd assembled a coalition, a dozen powerful lords who saw Lucian's engagement as opportunity. They'd been planning this for months, waiting for the right weakness to exploit. The smuggling incident, the Privy Council summons, Cordelia's investigation, all coordinated, all designed to force Lucian into an impossible choice, power or love. They assumed he'd choose power, that the Iron Duke would never sacrifice position for sentiment. That was their mistake. "Tomorrow," Cedric said, "they're going to present evidence that you coerced my signature, that you manipulated Evelyn into the engagement, that everything you've done has been abuse of authority disguised as romance. And you can disprove this?" Cedric produced a folder thick with documents. Correspondence, financial records, testimony from servants Ashford had bribed, everything proving the coalition had manufactured the scandal from beginning to end. "Why give this to me?" Lucian asked. "What do you gain?" Cedric's smile was bitter. "Revenge. Ashford promised me protection, then threw me to wolves when it suited him. I'm destroying him the way he destroyed me. And Evelyn? I was wrong about her, about Oliver. They deserve better than what I offered." The admission cost Cedric visibly. But Lucian recognized truth when he heard it. "This evidence will destroy half the Privy Council," Lucian observed. "Yes, and create a power vacuum that could destabilize the entire Northern Territories. Also, yes." Lucian looked at the documents spread across his desk. The smart play was obvious. Use the evidence. Crush Ashford's coalition. Emerge victorious and more powerful than before. The Iron Duke's play. But using the evidence meant becoming the monster they accused him of being. Meant ruling through fear and blackmail instead of principle. Meant proving Eveline wrong about who he could be. "There's another option," Lucian said slowly. Cedric frowned. "What?" "I don't use the evidence. I let the hearing proceed. And I tell them the truth. That's suicide. Maybe. Or maybe it's the only way to win that matters." Understanding dawned in Cedric's eyes. "You're going to choose her, publicly, regardless of cost." "Yes. They'll strip everything from you. I know. And you're doing it anyway." Lucian gathered the evidence carefully, locking it in his safe. Not as weapon, as insurance. Something to protect Evelyn and Oliver if things went catastrophically wrong. But he wouldn't lead with it, because the man Evelyn loved wasn't the Iron Duke who crushed enemies without mercy. He was just Lucian, a man trying to be worthy of the trust she'd placed in him, even if it cost him everything. The hearing began at dawn in the Privy Council's formal chamber. 12 lords sat in judgment, their faces carefully neutral. Lord Ashford sat among them, satisfaction barely concealed. Lucian stood alone at the center of the chamber, refusing the chair they'd provided, refusing to sit while they decided his fate. "Duke Blackthorne," the Lord Chancellor began, "you've been summoned to address concerns about your recent conduct, specifically your engagement to Mrs. Eveline Mercer and the circumstances surrounding that arrangement. I'm aware of the charges, Lucian said. Then you understand the gravity of this proceeding. I understand you're questioning my right to choose my own wife. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Lord Chancellor's expression hardened. We question the propriety of a duke engaging himself to a woman of questionable background during suspicious circumstances. We question the pressure applied to Lord Cedric Mercer to secure custody rights. We question whether your judgment has been compromised by— Say it, Lucian interrupted. Say what you really mean. The chamber fell silent. You think I'm being manipulated by a desperate widow. You think sentiment has made me weak. You think the Iron Duke has forgotten how power actually works. The Lord Chancellor bristled. Those are your words, Your Grace, not ours. But they're what you believe. So let me address them directly. Lucian stepped forward, his voice carrying through the chamber with decades of command behind it. Yes, I'm engaged to Eveline Mercer. Yes, she's a widow with a child. Yes, I applied pressure to Cedric Mercer when he attempted to seize custody through fraudulent means. And no, I don't regret any of it. Your Grace, I've spent 30 years ruling the Northern Territories through fear and ruthless efficiency. I've crushed rebellions, bankrupted traitors, and maintained order through sheer force of will. And I've been completely alone doing it. The honesty made several council members shift uncomfortably. Eveline Mercer didn't manipulate me. She challenged me. Made me remember there's more to life than power and position. Made me want to be something other than the monster you're all so comfortable with. This is highly irregular. And yes, if choosing her means losing my titles, I'll accept that cost. Because I've finally found something worth more than a dukedom. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Lord Ashford stood, his face twisted with contempt. This is pathetic. The great Iron Duke reduced to sentimental speeches about love. You've proven exactly why this engagement cannot stand. You're compromised, weakened, unfit to hold your position. Lucian turned to face him directly. Careful, Ashford. You're revealing your hand. I'm revealing the truth. You've abandoned your responsibilities for a woman who survived your sister's investigation with dignity and tact, Lucian interrupted, who refused to be broken by false testimony and manufactured scandal, who has more strength in her little finger than you'll ever possess. Ashford's face went purple. How dare you? How dare I what? Defend my future wife? Refuse to abandon her because powerful men demand it? Choose love over political convenience? Lucian's voice filled the chamber, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't hiding behind the Iron Duke's armor. He was just speaking truth. I know what you all think, that I've gone soft. That sentiment has destroyed my judgment, that the smart play is choosing power over everything else. He looked around the chamber, meeting each council member's eyes. And you're right, the old me would have made that choice without hesitation, would have calculated the cost and chosen pragmatism over feeling. Lucian paused, letting the admission settle. But that man was dead inside, haunted by guilt, incapable of human connection, and I refuse to be him anymore. The declaration hung in the air like a blade. So here's my offer, Lucian continued. Strip my titles if you must, seize my lands, do whatever satisfies your need for control. But I'm marrying Eveline Mercer regardless of outcome. The Lord Chancellor looked genuinely shocked. Your Grace, you cannot be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. Then you leave us no choice but to— Wait, the new voice came from the chamber entrance. Every head turned. The king himself stood there, flanked by royal guards. Lucien's heart stopped, because if the king had come personally, the game was already over, and everything he'd fought to protect was about to be ripped away. The king's presence sucked all oxygen from the chamber. Every council member dropped to their knees instantly, decades of training overriding shock. Lucien remained standing, his spine rigid, because bowing now would feel like surrender, and he'd already decided that surrender wasn't an option. The king was younger than Lucien expected, mid-30s, sharp-eyed, carrying authority that came from birthright rather than battle. But intelligence burned behind his careful neutrality, and Lucien recognized a calculating mind when he saw one. Your Majesty, the Lord Chancellor gasped. We weren't expecting— I know what you were expecting, the king interrupted smoothly. A quiet hearing where you could strip a troublesome duke of his titles without royal interference. How convenient that would have been. The Lord Chancellor's face went pale. Your Majesty, I assure you, Silence. The single word dropped like an executioner's blade. The chamber fell so quiet, Lucien could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. This was it. The moment when everything he'd built would either stand or collapse. The king walked slowly toward the center of the chamber, his boots clicking against marble with deliberate rhythm. He stopped directly in front of Lucien, and their eyes met. "Duke Blackthorn," the king said, "you've caused quite a scandal." "Yes, your majesty. The aristocracy believes you've lost your mind over a widow. They're entitled to their opinion. And you're willing to lose everything for this woman?" Without hesitation. The king's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Interest. Or perhaps recognition. "Tell me, Duke, what makes her worth this cost?" The question wasn't rhetorical. The king actually wanted an answer. Lucien felt every eye in the chamber watching him, waiting to see if sentiment would make him stumble. "She made me remember I'm human," Lucien said quietly. "Not just a title or a weapon for the crown. A man capable of building something other than fear." The king studied him for a long moment. "And if I order you to end this engagement, to return to your duties and forget about Mrs. Mercer?" Lucien's jaw tightened. "Then I would respectfully refuse." "Your Majesty, even knowing refusal means treason?" "Even then." The silence that followed was suffocating. Lord Ashford looked triumphant. The council members looked horrified. And Lucien felt the weight of his decision settle across his shoulders like iron. He just committed treason in front of the king. There was no walking back from this. The king turned away, pacing slowly around the chamber's perimeter. Every step felt calculated, deliberate, designed to build pressure until someone broke. But Lucien had been playing power games since before most of these men were born. He knew how to wait, how to endure silence until it became weapon instead of weakness. "Lord Ashford," the king said suddenly, "tell me about your son's arrest." Ashford stood quickly, surprise evident. "Your Majesty, my son was wrongfully detained by Duke Blackthorn's guards on false charges of—" "False charges?" the king interrupted. "I've reviewed the evidence personally. Smuggling, assault, conspiracy with criminal networks operating across 3 territories. Where exactly is the falsehood?" Ashford's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Lucien watched the man scramble for footing, watched calculation war with panic. "The evidence was obtained improperly," Ashford tried. "Without proper authorization. The evidence was obtained by the Duke's lawful authority within his own territories. Unless you're suggesting Duke Blackthorn lacks jurisdiction over his own lands?" "No, your Majesty, but—" "And Lady Cordelia's investigation into Mrs. Mercer." The king's voice went cold. "Tell me about that." Ashford's face lost all color. "That was— the Privy Council authorized—" "I checked. The Privy Council authorized no such investigation. The documents bore forged seals, which makes your sister guilty of impersonating royal authority. But your Majesty, we were simply trying to— Trying to what? Destroy a duke's reputation because he wouldn't release your criminal son?" The king's voice cut through the chamber like a whip. Lucien felt something shift in the air. The power dynamic he'd thought was crushing him had suddenly reversed. The king wasn't here to punish him. He was here to punish them. "I came to London," the king continued, "because disturbing reports reached me. Reports of a coordinated effort to undermine one of my most effective dukes. Reports of forged documents, bribed servants, manufactured scandal, all designed to force Duke Blackthorn into an impossible position." "Your Majesty," Lord Ashford stammered, "I can explain." "You can be silent." The command landed with absolute authority. Ashford collapsed back into his seat, terror replacing triumph on his features. The king turned to face the full council. "Here is what I see. A duke who has ruled the northern territories with unprecedented efficiency for 3 decades, who has crushed rebellion, maintained order, and generated more revenue for the crown than any other region, who has sacrificed personal happiness for duty his entire adult life." He paused, letting the words settle. "And now, when this duke finally finds something worth protecting beyond his position, you vultures circle. Not because he's failed his duties, not because he's incompetent, but because he dared to choose love over political convenience." Several council members looked genuinely ashamed. Others just looked terrified. Lucien stood frozen, barely breathing, because the king's defense was more devastating than any attack could have been. "Let me be absolutely clear," the king said. "Duke Blackthorn's engagement to Mrs. Mercer has my full support. Anyone who attempts to undermine that engagement will be considered an enemy of the crown. Your Majesty, the Lord Chancellor said carefully. With respect, the precedent. I don't care about precedent, I care about results. And Duke Blackthorn delivers results. If he believes Mrs. Mercer will make him more effective, not less, then I trust his judgment. The king's gaze swept across the council like a scythe through wheat. Furthermore, I'm dissolving this hearing immediately. All charges against Duke Blackthorn are dismissed. Lord Ashford, your son will stand trial according to law, and you will not interfere. Lady Cordelia will surrender herself to royal magistrates to face charges of document forgery and attempted fraud. But, Your Majesty, are my commands unclear, Lord Ashford? No, Your Majesty. Good. Then get out of my sight. Ashford fled the chamber like a man escaping execution. Half the council followed him, desperate to distance themselves from the catastrophe. Within minutes, only the king, Lucien, and a handful of witnesses remained. The king approached Lucien again, and this time his expression held something closer to respect. You were prepared to lose everything, the king observed quietly. Titles, lands, position, all for a woman you've known less than 2 months. Yes, Your Majesty. That's either the stupidest decision I've ever witnessed or the bravest. Lucien met the king's eyes. I'm not sure there's a difference. The king laughed, genuine and surprised. No, I suppose there isn't. He extended his hand and Lucien shook it, feeling the weight of royal approval settle alongside the weight of responsibility. Take care of her, the king said, and take care of the northern territories. In that order. Because a duke who remembers he's human is worth 10 who only remember they're powerful. Lucien bowed, the gesture coming easier now that the battle was won. Thank you, Your Majesty. Don't thank me. Just prove I was right to trust you. The king departed with his guards, leaving Lucien standing alone in the chamber where he'd expected to be destroyed. Instead, he'd been vindicated, protected, given permission to choose happiness without sacrificing duty. It felt surreal. His lawyer appeared from the shadows, looking shell-shocked. Your Grace, that was. I've never seen anything like that. Neither have I. The king himself came to your defense, against the Privy Council, against half the aristocracy. Lucien nodded slowly, still processing, which means I owe him everything. The lawyer hesitated. Your Grace, there will be expectations. The king doesn't grant favors without. I know. Whatever he needs, I'll deliver. Because that was the price of protection. The king had saved Lucien's position, but the debt created was massive. Someday, somehow, payment would come due. Lucien would worry about that later. Right now, he needed to get back to Blackthorn Manor before Evelyn heard distorted versions of what happened. The ride north took 2 days of brutal pace. Lucien barely slept, barely ate, just drove himself and his horse through freezing rain and exhaustion, because every hour away from Evelyn felt like inviting disaster. The manor appeared through mist like salvation rising from stone. Lucien spurred his horse faster, mud flying, urgency overriding fatigue. He hit the entrance hall at a run, calling her name. Evelyn appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale but composed. Then she saw him, and composure shattered. She flew down the stairs, and Lucien caught her mid-leap, his arms wrapping around her waist as momentum nearly toppled them both. You're back, she gasped against his neck. You're really back. I told you I would be. The rumors said, Evelyn pulled back to look at his face, they said you were arrested, that the king himself condemned you, that everything was lost. Lucien kissed her hard, pouring relief and victory and love into contact. When they broke apart, he was grinning. The king saved us, destroyed Ashford, gave his blessing to our engagement. Evelyn stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. What? I'll explain everything. But first, Uncle Lucien, Oliver's voice carried from the library. The boy appeared in the doorway, wooden horse clutched in one hand, relief flooding his young face. You came home. Lucien released Evelyn and dropped to one knee as Oliver crashed into him. The impact was small but fierce, all trust and joy and uncomplicated love. I gave my word, Lucien said quietly. I keep my promises. Oliver pulled back, studying his face with that unsettling perception children possessed. Mama was scared. She tried to hide it, but I knew. Your mother is very brave, so are you. The simple faith in Oliver's voice made Lucien's throat tighten. This child had lost one father already. had survived abandonment and fear and uncertainty. And now he was trusting Lucien not just with safety, but with love. The weight of that trust was crushing and beautiful in equal measure. "Come on," Lucien said, standing and taking Oliver's hand. "Let's tell your mother everything that happened." They gathered in the library where this whole journey had started. Eveline sat beside Lucien while Oliver occupied Thomas's favorite chair, listening with rapt attention as Lucien recounted the hearing, the king's intervention, Ashford's destruction, the full royal blessing for their engagement. By the time he finished, Eveline was crying again. Not from fear this time. From relief so profound it had nowhere else to go. "We're safe," she whispered. "Actually safe, for now." Lucien's qualification made her look up sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means the king protected us, but protection creates debt. Someday he'll call it in, and when he does, we pay it, together." Eveline took his hand, her grip fierce. "Whatever comes, we face it. No running, no hiding, no surrender. Never." Oliver watched them with satisfaction. "Does this mean we're staying at Blackthorn Manor forever?" Lucien looked around the library Eveline had restored, at the books Thomas had loved, at the portrait hanging above the fireplace showing his brother's reckless grin, at the family he'd somehow built from grief and guilt and impossible choices. "Yes," he said, "we're staying." That night, after Oliver was asleep, Lucien found Eveline on the terrace overlooking the cliffs. She stood wrapped in a cloak against winter wind, staring at the ocean crashing against rocks below. Lucien moved beside her and she leaned into his warmth without speaking. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How much has changed in 2 months? I came here desperate and terrified, hiding from Cedric with nothing but hope and stubbornness. And now I'm engaged to a duke protected by the king and somehow still terrified. Of what?" Eveline turned to face him. "Of losing this. Of waking up and discovering it was all a dream. Of the aristocracy finding new ways to destroy us." Lucien pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "They'll try. The powerful always do when someone breaks their rules. And we'll survive? We'll do more than survive. We'll build something they can't touch." "How can you be so certain?" "Because I've spent 30 years being what they demanded. Now I'm done. Whatever comes next, we face it on our terms. Even if it costs everything? Even then." Eveline tilted her head back to look at him. When did the Iron Duke become such an optimist? When a widow taught him that beautiful things shouldn't be abandoned just because they carry pain. The words were Eveline's own, thrown back at her with affection. She laughed, the sound carrying across the cliffs like light through darkness. "I love you," she said, "even when you're being insufferably romantic." "Good, because you're stuck with me now. Promise?" Lucien kissed her slowly, tasting salt air and future possibilities. When he pulled back, his expression was serious. "Marry me tomorrow." Eveline blinked. "What?" "Not the formal ceremony. We'll do that later with all the aristocratic theater they'll demand. But tomorrow, just us and Oliver and a magistrate. Make it legal before anyone can interfere. You want to elope. I want to make sure no one can tear you away from me ever again." Eveline's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, God, yes." The next morning, Lucien called for the village magistrate. The man arrived confused and nervous, clearly uncertain why the Duke required his presence so urgently. Lucien explained in 3 sentences. The magistrate's eyes went wide, but he didn't refuse. Refusing a Duke was career suicide. They gathered in the Manor's chapel, small, intimate. Nothing like the grand ceremony the aristocracy would expect. Eveline wore a simple dress. Oliver stood beside her, clutching his wooden horse. Marcus served as witness, his expression carefully neutral but satisfaction visible in his eyes. The magistrate performed the ceremony with efficient precision. No poetry, no elaborate vows, just the legal words that bound 2 people together under law. When it was done, Lucien kissed his wife while Oliver cheered and Marcus actually smiled. "Mrs. Blackthorn," Lucien said quietly. Eveline laughed. "That's going to take getting used to. You have the rest of your life." They spent the day celebrating quietly. No grand announcements, no aristocratic guests, just the 3 of them walking the estate grounds, planning renovations, imagining futures that felt suddenly possible. Oliver ran ahead, chasing winter birds while Eveline and Lucien followed hand in hand. "This feels too perfect," Eveline said. "Like we're tempting fate." "Maybe we are," But I'm done being afraid of happiness. Even though happiness is fragile, especially because it's fragile, that's what makes it worth protecting. Evelyn squeezed his hand. When did you become so wise? When I stopped trying to control everything and started trusting someone else. They watched Oliver climb a tree with reckless confidence. The boy had gained weight since arriving at Blackthorn Manor. Color had returned to his cheeks. Laughter came easily now instead of being rationed like precious resource. He's happy, Evelyn observed. So am I. Really? Lucian pulled her close. For the first time in 6 years, yes. Really. That evening, a rider arrived from London. Marcus brought the letter to Lucy's study with visible trepidation. From the king, your grace. Lucian opened it, already knowing what it would say. The debt was being called in. Sooner than expected, but inevitable. He read quickly, his expression darkening with each line. What is it? Evelyn asked from the doorway. The king needs me in the capital. There's been an uprising in the Eastern Territories. He wants me to command the suppression personally. For how long? However long it takes to restore order. Weeks. Maybe months. Evelyn's face went pale. You just got back. I know. We just got married. I know. And you're leaving again. Lucian set down the letter carefully. This is the price, Evelyn. The king protected us. Now he's collecting payment. By taking you away? By using me the way he's always used me, as a weapon against rebellion. Evelyn crossed the room and took the letter from his hands, reading it herself. Her expression shifted from fear to understanding to grim acceptance. When do you leave? 3 days. Can I come with you? Lucian shook his head. The Eastern Territories are violent, unstable. I won't put you and Oliver in danger. Then we wait here while you fight someone else's war. It's not someone else's war. It's the king's war, which makes it mine. The logic was sound but hollow. Evelyn heard it too, saw through it to the truth underneath. You don't want to go? No, but you will anyway. Because I owe him, and because refusing would destroy everything we've built. Evelyn set down the letter and wrapped her arms around him. Then come back to me. However long it takes, whatever you have to do, come back. Always. Promise me. Lucienne pulled back to look at her face. I promise. On my life, on my title, on everything I am. I will come back to you. The next 3 days passed too quickly. Lucian prepared for departure while Evelyn tried not to let fear consume her. Oliver sensed something was wrong, but didn't understand what. The morning Lucian left, the boy appeared in his study with the wooden horse. Take it, Oliver said, for protection. Lucian knelt to the child's level. I need you to keep it safe here. Can you do that for me? Why? Because it reminds me what I'm coming back to. Oliver studied him seriously. You promise you're coming back? Yes. Uncle Cedric promised too. Then he died. The blunt honesty was devastating. Lucien felt his chest tighten, grief and responsibility tangling together. Your uncle got sick. I'm going to war. They're different things, but people die in wars. Yes, they do. Lucien wouldn't lie to the boy, wouldn't offer false comfort. Oliver deserved truth, even when truth was terrifying. I can't promise nothing will happen to me, Lucien said carefully. War is dangerous. But I can promise I'll fight like hell to come back to you and your mother. Oliver nodded slowly. That's good enough. He hugged Lucien fiercely, then ran off before tears could fall. Lucien watched him go, feeling the weight of promises settle across his shoulders. Evelyn waited in the entrance hall, composure rebuilt but fragile. Lucien kissed her goodbye while servants pretended not to watch. No heroics, Evelyn whispered. Just come home. I'll do my best. That's not good enough. I need you alive, not legendary. Lucien smiled despite the circumstances. I love you. I love you too. Now go before I find a way to keep you here. He rode away from Blackthorn Manor with 50 armed men, heading east toward rebellion and bloodshed. Behind him, his wife and son stood watching until he disappeared into morning mist. The Eastern Territories were worse than intelligence reports suggested. The rebellion had spread faster than anyone anticipated, fueled by noble grievances and peasant desperation in equal measure. Lucien spent weeks crushing resistance with methodical efficiency. Villages secured, leaders captured, order restored through overwhelming force. But victory came at cost. His men died. Civilians suffered. And every death felt heavier than it used to, because now Lucien had something to lose beyond reputation. He had Evelyn waiting at Blackthorn Manor, had Oliver trusting him to come home, had a life worth protecting instead of just power worth maintaining. It made him more cautious, more strategic, more willing to negotiate when force wasn't necessary. The Iron Duke would have simply crushed everything, but Lucien Blackthorn, Evelyn's husband, tried diplomacy first. It worked. Mostly. 2 months into the campaign, Lucien received word that the rebellion's leadership wanted to negotiate surrender. He agreed to meet them under truce conditions, bringing minimal guards. Marcus objected strenuously. "Your Grace, it could be a trap. Everything's a trap until proven otherwise. We go anyway." The meeting was scheduled in a neutral village. Witnesses present to prevent betrayal. Lucien arrived with 5 guards, enough for protection, but not enough to appear threatening. The rebel leaders were younger than expected, desperate rather than ideological. They'd been pushed into rebellion by aristocrats squeezing them for resources, then abandoned when things turned violent. Lucien offered terms: fair taxation, land reforms, justice for nobles who'd abused their authority. In exchange, the rebels would surrender and face trials for their crimes, not execution, imprisonment with possibility of parole. It was more mercy than the Iron Duke would have offered, but Lucien wasn't just the Iron Duke anymore. The rebel leaders accepted. Within weeks, the eastern territories stabilized. The king sent official congratulations and permission to return home. Lucien departed immediately, leaving garrison forces to maintain order. The ride back to Blackthorn Manor felt endless. Every mile between him and Evelyn was torture. He arrived at dawn, exhausted and filthy from travel. The manor rose from the cliffs like sanctuary, and Lucien felt something inside his chest finally relax. Home. He dismounted in the entrance courtyard, and the doors flew open. Evelyn stood there, backlit by interior warmth, and the sight of her made Lucien's throat tighten. She looked thinner, more tired, but her eyes were bright with relief. "You're back," she said. "I promised." Evelyn crossed the distance between them at a run, and Lucien caught her, lifting her off her feet. She kissed him desperately, and he tasted tears mixed with joy. "I missed you," Evelyn whispered. "I missed you too, every single day." Oliver appeared behind her, older-looking somehow, despite only 2 months passing. The boy waited until Evelyn released Lucien, then stepped forward. "You kept your promise." "Always will." Oliver nodded, satisfied, and handed Lucien the wooden horse. "You can give this back now. You're home." Lucien took it carefully. "Thank you for keeping it safe." That night, after Oliver was asleep and servants had withdrawn, Evelyn and Lucien sat in the library where everything had started. "Tell me about the war," Evelyn said. Lucien told her. Not the sanitized version aristocrats preferred, but the truth. The violence, the deaths, the compromises he'd made between justice and mercy. "You negotiated," Evelyn observed. "The old you would have just crushed them. The old me didn't have you waiting at home. So I changed you. You reminded me I was human. There's a difference." Evelyn curled against him, her head on his chest. "What happens now?" "Now we live. Restore the estate, raise Oliver, build something that lasts. No more wars? I can't promise that. The king will call when he needs me, and you'll go." It wasn't a question. Evelyn understood duty now, understood the cost of the protection they'd been granted. "Yes," Lucien said, "but I'll always come back. Promise? On everything I am." They sat in comfortable silence, firelight dancing across restored furniture and clean portraits. Outside, winter storms battered the manor walls. But inside, warmth held. Lucien looked at Thomas's portrait above the fireplace. His brother's grin seemed different now, less haunting, more approving. Like Thomas was finally at peace with what Blackthorn Manor had become. A home instead of a tomb. A place where love built alongside duty instead of being sacrificed to it. Evelyn shifted against him. "What are you thinking?" "That I'm glad I came back here. Glad I found you. Glad I chose this over everything else." "No regrets?" Lucien kissed the top of her head. "Not a single one." But even as he said it, unease crept up his spine. Because peace was fragile, happiness was vulnerable, and the aristocracy never truly forgot when someone broke their rules. Somewhere in London, enemies were regrouping, planning, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when they did, Lucien would have to defend not just his position, but his family, with everything he had. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt clarifying, because the Iron Duke had ruled through fear alone. But Lucian Blackthorn had something worth fighting for beyond power, and that made him infinitely more dangerous. 3 weeks later, the letter arrived. Marcus brought it to Lucian's study at dawn, his face ashen. "Your Grace, this just came from London." Urgent seal. Lucian opened it, and the first line made his blood freeze. Duke Blackthorn. "Your presence is required in London immediately. The Queen has taken gravely ill. The King requests you assume command of royal security during this crisis. Departure is not optional." Lucien read it twice, searching for hidden meanings. Then he saw the postscript, written in the King's own hand. "I'm calling in the debt. Come now. Bring your family. This is not a request." The words were clear. This wasn't about the Queen's illness. This was about something else entirely. Something dangerous enough that the King wanted Evelyn and Oliver where he could see them, where he could protect them, or control them. Lucien stood slowly, his mind already calculating angles and threats. The summons was a trap, or a warning, or both. But refusing meant losing everything they'd fought to protect. "Marcus," Lucien said quietly, "prepare the carriages. We leave for London in 2 hours." "Your Grace, is that wise?" "No, but it's necessary." "What do I tell Mrs. Blackthorn?" "Tell her we're going to war. Only this time, the battlefield wasn't distant territories. It was the capital itself. And the enemy wasn't rebels. It was the crown." The journey to London took 4 days through rain that felt like the sky itself was warning them to turn back. Evelyn sat across from Lucien in the carriage, Oliver sleeping between them, and neither spoke much. Words felt inadequate against the weight of what waited ahead. Lucien watched the landscape blur past rain-streaked windows and calculated probabilities the way he'd done his entire life. The King's summons was precise, urgent, and the postscript about bringing his family was the part that kept him awake at night. Protection or leverage. Those were the only 2 reasons a king would want a duke's wife and child in the capital during a crisis. Either the king was shielding them from threats Lucien couldn't see yet, or he was ensuring Lucien's complete compliance by holding them close. Both options terrified him. Evelyn's hand found his across the carriage space. Her fingers were cold despite the warming bricks at their feet. "Whatever this is," she said quietly, "we face it together. You don't have to be brave all the time. Neither do you." Lucien almost smiled. But bravery wasn't optional anymore. Not when everything he'd built could collapse if he made the wrong move in London. They arrived at the capital after dark, and the city felt different, tense. Guards were stationed at intervals that spoke of heightened security rather than routine patrols. Windows that should have blazed with candlelight remained dark. Even the usual street noise felt muted, like London itself was holding its breath. The royal palace loomed against storm clouds, and Lucien's carriage was stopped 3 times before reaching the inner courtyard. Each checkpoint inspected credentials with paranoid precision. Something was very wrong. A royal steward met them at the entrance, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Your Grace, Mrs. Blackthorn, the king is waiting in his private study. Immediate audience." "And my son?" Evelyn asked, her hand tightening on Oliver's shoulder. "The boy will be taken to secure quarters. He'll be safe and well cared for." Evelyn looked at Lucien, fear flickering in her eyes. Separating Oliver from them felt like the first move in a trap, but refusing would signal distrust of the king, which could be just as dangerous. Lucien knelt to Oliver's level. "You'll be safe here. Do what the steward tells you." "Are you leaving?" "Just for a little while. Your mother and I need to speak with the king." Oliver's jaw tightened, trying to be brave. "Then come back soon as we can." The boy was led away by servants, glancing back twice with worry etched across his young face. Evelyn watched him go with visible effort, every maternal instinct screaming to follow. Lucien took her hand. "He's safer here than anywhere else in the kingdom right now. You don't know that." "No, but I believe it." The king's private study was smaller than expected, intimate, the kind of space designed for conversations that couldn't happen in throne rooms. A fire burned despite the late spring warmth, and the king sat behind a desk covered in maps and reports. He looked older than when Lucien had seen him 2 months ago. Stress carved lines around his eyes, and his shoulders carried weight that hadn't been there before. "Duke Blackthorn," the king said without preamble. "Mrs. Blackthorn, thank you for coming so quickly." "Your Majesty," Lucian said carefully, "your letter suggested urgency." The king gestured for them to sit. Guards positioned themselves at the door, but far enough away to provide the illusion of privacy. "The Queen's illness is a cover story," the king said bluntly. "She's perfectly healthy. I needed a reason to summon you that wouldn't alert my enemies to the real crisis." Lucian felt ice settle in his veins. What crisis? The king stood, moving to the window overlooking the palace grounds. "There's a plot. Not rebellion exactly, more sophisticated. A coalition of nobles planning to depose me and install my cousin as puppet king. How long have you known?" 3 weeks. My spies infiltrated their network, but I can't move against them without proof that would satisfy the Privy Council. These aren't minor lords, Duke. These are men with armies, resources, influence. And you need me to what? Crush them? The king turned back, and his expression was grim. "I need you to do what you do best. Investigate, gather evidence, find the connections that prove conspiracy beyond doubt. Then, when the moment's right, I need you to help me destroy them completely." Lucian understood immediately. This was the debt payment, not just commanding troops, becoming the king's weapon against internal threats. It was also profoundly dangerous, because if the conspiracy succeeded, Lucien would be executed alongside the king, and Evelyn and Oliver would be collateral damage. "How long do we have?" Lucien asked. "Days. Maybe a week. They're planning to move during the summer festival when half the kingdom is in London. Maximum chaos. Minimum chance of my loyal forces responding in time." Evelyn leaned forward. "Your Majesty, why bring us here? Why not leave Oliver and me at Blackthorn Manor, where we'd be safe?" The king's expression softened slightly. "Because your husband has enemies, Mrs. Blackthorn. Powerful ones who would absolutely use you as leverage if they knew you were unprotected in the north. Here, under my guard, you're safer than anywhere else in the kingdom. Or your hostages ensuring Lucian's cooperation," Evelyn said quietly. The king didn't deny it. Both can be true simultaneously. The honesty was brutal but appreciated. Lucien respected directness more than comfortable lies. "Who's leading the conspiracy?" he asked. The king hesitated, then said, "Lord Ashford." Of course it was. The man Lucian had humiliated, whose son he'd imprisoned, whose sister he'd forced out of Blackthorn Manor. Ashford had every reason to want Lucian destroyed, and deposing the king would be satisfying revenge. "Ashford's building alliances," the king continued. "Using your engagement scandal as proof that I've lost control of the aristocracy, that I'm too weak to maintain proper order. So my choice to marry Evelyn is being weaponized against you, and against yourself. If the conspiracy succeeds, you'll be executed as my corrupt enforcer. Your wife will be imprisoned, or worse. Oliver will disappear into some workhouse, and Blackthorn Manor will be seized." The king laid out the stakes with surgical precision. Lucian felt Evelyn's hand find his again, her grip tight enough to hurt. "What do you need from me?" Lucian asked. "Access to the conspirators. You're known for ruthlessness, which means they'll approach you to join them. Pretend to be disaffected. Claim I'm demanding too much. That your marriage has made you realize the crown doesn't own you. Make them believe you're considering betrayal. You want me to infiltrate the conspiracy. I want you to gut it from the inside, find the evidence, identify every participant, then help me destroy them before they can move. And if they suspect I'm a plant?" The king's expression went cold. "Then you die, and I lose my best weapon, so don't get caught." The meeting lasted another hour while the king outlined what intelligence he'd already gathered. Names, meeting locations, financial trails suggesting coordination across multiple territories. It was a masterclass in conspiracy, and Ashford had clearly been planning this for months, maybe years. By the time Lucien and Evelyn were dismissed, dawn was breaking over London. They were escorted to royal guest quarters where Oliver was already asleep in an adjoining bedroom. Evelyn checked on him first, her hand lingering on his forehead like she could protect him through touch alone. Then she returned to Lucien, and composure finally cracked. "This is my fault," she whispered. "If I hadn't... Don't." Lucien pulled her close. "None of this is your fault. Ashford was already dangerous, already ambitious. Our marriage just gave him a convenient excuse. But if you'd never met me, then I'd still be the Iron Duke. Alone, empty, ruling through fear without knowing there was another way. He tilted her face up, forcing her to meet his eyes. I'd rather face this with you than rule safely without you. Do you understand? Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. I'm terrified. So am I. But we've survived worse. Have we? The question hung between them. Because this was different. This wasn't about their relationship or reputation. This was survival itself. One wrong move and they'd all die. Lucien kissed her forehead. Get some sleep. We'll need our strength. What are you going to do? Start making contact with the conspirators. If Ashford is recruiting, I need to seem available. And if he suspects your loyalty, then I convince him otherwise. I've been playing power games since before he was born. I know how to lie. But Evelyn looked unconvinced. The problem with lying was that it required distance, emotional detachment, the ability to prioritize strategy over sentiment, and Lucien had spent the past 3 months learning to do exactly the opposite. Over the next 3 days, Lucien attended aristocratic gatherings with calculated frequency. He let slip comments about the king's demanding nature, about feeling constrained by royal obligations, about missing the autonomy he'd enjoyed before the Eastern Territories campaign. Word spread quickly. The Iron Duke was disaffected, potentially available. On the 4th night, Lord Ashford himself approached Lucien at a formal dinner. The man's smile was poisonous, satisfaction barely concealed. Your Grace, Ashford said smoothly, I've been hoping we might speak privately, about matters of mutual interest. Lucien kept his expression neutral. I'm listening. Not here. Too many ears. My estate tomorrow evening. Bring no guards. Just yourself. That's asking a lot of trust. Ashford's smile widened. I prefer to think of it as asking for proof of sincerity. The challenge was clear. Come alone and prove you're genuinely considering betrayal. Or refuse and confirm your loyalty to the king. Lucien made a show of considering, then nodded slowly. Tomorrow evening. But Ashford, if this is a trap, it's not. I'm offering you something far more valuable than the king's gratitude. What? Freedom. The word was chosen perfectly, because freedom was exactly what Lucien had been claiming to want. Autonomy, independence, the ability to choose his own path. It was also exactly what he'd already found with Evelyn. But Ashford didn't know that. Lucien returned to the royal quarters and briefed the king immediately. The monarch listened carefully, his expression grave. He's testing you. Seeing if you'll come alone proves you're serious about betrayal. Or it's an ambush. Possibly. But if Ashford wanted you dead, there are easier methods. This feels like recruitment. Then I go. The king nodded. My spies will position outside the estate. If things go wrong, they'll extract you. But Duke, if Ashford offers you real information, I need you to get it regardless of risk. Understood? And Duke? The king's voice dropped. If this goes badly, your family stays under my protection. Whatever happens to you, I'll ensure they survive. The promise should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like the king preparing for Lucien's death. That night, Lucien held Evelyn while she slept, memorizing the way she breathed, the warmth of her against him, the trust in her unconscious grip on his shirt. If tomorrow went wrong, this might be the last time. He kissed her temple gently, and she stirred. Can't sleep? She murmured. Just thinking. About tomorrow? Yes. Evelyn sat up, studying his face in moonlight. You're going to do something dangerous. I don't have a choice. You always have a choice. The question is whether you'll choose survival or principle. Lucien pulled her back against his chest. What if I told you I'm choosing both? Then I'd say you're lying to yourself. Maybe. But I'm good at lying. Evelyn turned to face him fully. Promise me something, anything. If it comes down to saving the king or saving yourself, choose yourself. Choose us. The request was simple but devastating, because choosing himself meant betraying the man who'd protected their engagement, meant abandoning honor for survival, meant becoming exactly what the conspirators accused him of being. I can't promise that, Lucien said quietly. Why not? Because if I betray the king, we'll spend the rest of our lives running, always looking over our shoulders, never safe. Oliver would grow up knowing his father was a traitor, better alive and disgraced than dead and noble. Maybe. But I built a reputation on keeping my word. If I break that now, what do I become? Eveline's eyes filled with tears. You become someone who chose his family over abstract concepts of honor. Is that what you want? A husband who survives through betrayal? I want you alive. Everything else is negotiable. The admission was raw, honest, completely at odds with the aristocratic values they'd been raised to uphold, and Lucien loved her more for it. I'll do everything possible to come back to you, he said, but I won't become a traitor to do it. Some lines, once crossed, destroy who you are, and I need to stay someone you can respect. I'll respect you alive far more than dead. Then pray I'm smart enough to manage both. The next evening, Lucy rode to Ashford's estate alone. The building was massive, ostentation disguised as architecture. Guards lined the entrance but didn't stop him. Inside, servants directed him to a private study where Ashford waited with 3 other men. Lucien recognized them all. Powerful lords, rich, connected, men who'd built empires on exploitation and resented any authority above their own. The conspiracy was bigger than the king suspected. Your Grace, Ashford greeted. Thank you for coming. May I introduce Lords Pemberton, Harcourt, and Voss? The men nodded, their expressions calculating. Lucien was being evaluated, tested. One wrong word, and this ended badly. Gentlemen, Lucien said carefully, I assume this gathering has purpose beyond social pleasantries. Ashford smiled. Direct as always. Yes, Your Grace. We're discussing the kingdom's future, and we believe you might share our concerns about its current direction. What concerns specifically? Ashford gestured for Lucien to sit. The king has become erratic, making decisions based on personal whim rather than political wisdom. Your engagement scandal is merely the most visible example. The king supported my marriage, Lucien said. How is that erratic? Because it sets dangerous precedent, Lord Pemberton interjected. If dukes can marry whomever they wish without consequences, what's to stop lesser nobles from doing the same? Standards exist for reasons. You believe the king should have forced me to end my engagement. We believe the king should have never permitted it in the first place. Lucien let silence stretch, then carefully, testing the waters. So you're suggesting the king lacks judgment? We're suggesting the king has forgotten that power requires discipline, Ashford said. He's too young, too idealistic, too willing to indulge sentiment over strategy. And you have an alternative in mind? Ashford's smile widened. The king's cousin, Lord Edmund, older, wiser, more willing to let the aristocracy govern their own affairs without royal interference. You're talking about deposing the king. The words hung in the air like drawn blades. The conspirators exchanged glances, calculating whether Lucien's bluntness signaled genuine interest or trap. We're talking about correction, Lord Voss said smoothly, ensuring the kingdom has leadership that understands the proper balance of power. Through coup, through necessary intervention. Lucien leaned back, letting them see him consider. This was the moment. Commit to the infiltration or retreat. Why approach me? He asked. I'm the king's attack dog. Everyone knows that. Because you're also a man who just spent 2 months fighting the king's war in the Eastern Territories, Ashford said, while your new wife waited alone and vulnerable. Because you've sacrificed personal happiness for royal duty your entire life. And because we suspect you're tired of being used. The observation was too accurate. Lucien felt exposed, like Ashford had seen directly into his resentments. What are you offering? Lucien asked. Freedom to rule your territories without royal oversight, protection for your family, and a seat at the table when the new king is crowned. In exchange for what? Your cooperation when the moment comes. Specifically, your willingness to stand aside when we move against the current king. You want me to do nothing. We want you to choose wisely. Support a losing king and die with him, or support the inevitable and thrive. Lucien pretended to consider. How many others are involved? Enough. The king's support is thinner than he believes, and the timeline? Soon. Details will be shared once you commit. This was it. The moment where Lucien either gained their trust or failed completely. He thought of Evelyn waiting at the palace, of Oliver sleeping safely under royal guard, of everything he'd risked to build a life worth living. Then he thought of the king who'd protected that life when he could have destroyed it. I need time to consider, Lucien said carefully. This isn't a decision I make lightly. Ashford's expression darkened. We need commitment, Your Grace, not consideration, and you'll have it. but I'm not joining a conspiracy based on one conversation. Give me 3 days to think. If I'm in, I'm all in. If I'm not, I'll tell you directly." The conspirators exchanged glances. Lord Harcourt looked skeptical, but Ashford nodded slowly. 3 days, he agreed. Then we need your answer. And Duke? If you're considering betraying us, remember that your family is currently in London, very accessible to those who might wish them harm. The threat was explicit. Lucien felt rage burn through his chest, but kept his expression neutral. "Understood," he said quietly. The meeting concluded with forced pleasantries. Lucien rode back to the palace through darkness, his mind racing through implications and strategies. Ashford had just revealed the conspiracy was massive and imminent, that they had enough support to believe victory was inevitable, and that they were willing to threaten Evelyn and Oliver to ensure Lucien's cooperation. Everything the king needed to act. But 3 days wasn't enough time to gather the evidence required. Not legally, not in a way that would satisfy the Privy Council and prevent civil war, unless Lucien took a different approach. He found the king in the war room, studying maps with his generals. Lucien briefed him quickly, outlining everything the conspirators had revealed. The king's expression went from concerned to furious. "They threatened your family directly?" "Yes." "Then we move now, tonight. Arrest every name you've given me." Lucien shook his head. "That won't work. You need proof that satisfies the Privy Council, or you'll spark the civil war they're planning anyway. Half the aristocracy will see it as tyranny rather than justice." "Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest we give them exactly what they want. Let them believe I've joined their conspiracy. Let them gather for their planned coup. Then we crush them all at once with witnesses present." "You're proposing we let the conspiracy proceed?" "Right up until the moment they act. Then we spring the trap." The king studied Lucien carefully. "That's profoundly dangerous. If anything goes wrong, everything goes wrong and we die." "I know, but it's the only way to destroy the conspiracy completely, to expose every participant simultaneously. And your family stays under your protection until this ends. After, they're free to return to Blackthorn Manor." The king nodded slowly. 3 days, then. We prepare the countermove while you convince them you've joined." What Lucien didn't tell the king was that convincing the conspirators meant committing acts that would look like genuine betrayal, providing information, coordinating timing, earning trust through apparent treason, walking a knife's edge between loyalty and survival. He spent the next 2 days carefully feeding the conspirators intelligence that appeared valuable but was actually worthless. Troop movements that didn't matter, palace schedules that had already changed, just enough to seem cooperative without actually damaging the king's position. On the 3rd day, Ashford summoned him again. This time, the meeting included a dozen conspirators, all powerful, all committed. "Your Grace," Ashford said, "have you reached your decision?" Lucien looked around the room at men who'd built fortunes on cruelty disguised as governance, who saw people as resources, who'd willingly sacrifice thousands to protect their own power. Everything he'd been before Evelyn, everything he'd fought to stop being. "I'm in," he said quietly. "Tell me what you need." The conspirators erupted in satisfaction. Plans were unveiled. Lucien's role was specific. During the summer festival, he'd command palace security. At the designated moment, he'd stand down his forces and allow the conspirators access to the king. Simple, efficient, devastating. Lucien agreed to everything while memorizing names and positions, building the case that would destroy them all. The night before the festival, he found Evelyn in their quarters. She was reading to Oliver, her voice gentle and steady, despite the tension radiating through her body. When the boy finally slept, she turned to Lucien. "Tomorrow?" "Yes. And you'll be commanding security. That's my role." Evelyn stood, moving to face him directly. "So tomorrow you either betray the king or betray the conspirators. And either way, people die." "Yes. And us? If I succeed, we're safe. If I fail, the king's promised to protect you. That's not enough." Lucien pulled her close. "It's all I can offer." Evelyn's hands fisted in his shirt. "I knew marrying you meant danger, but I thought the danger would be external. Enemies attacking us. Not you walking into impossible situations where survival requires choosing between honor and family. I don't see it as a choice. Protecting the king protects our future. If the conspirators win, we'll never be safe. And if the king loses, despite your efforts, Then we run. Take Oliver and disappear to properties no one knows about. Build a new life far from aristocracy and power. You'd really do that? Abandon everything? I'd abandon the world for you two. The admission cost him. But it was true. Somewhere between arriving at Blackthorn Manor and now, Eveline and Oliver had become more important than any title or territory, more important than honor itself. She kissed him desperately, and Lucien tasted fear mixed with love. When they broke apart, Eveline's eyes were wet. "Come back to me," she whispered. "Whatever it takes. Come back. Always." The summer festival began at dawn with pageantry that disguised deadly intent. London filled with visitors. The palace grounds overflowed with aristocrats and common folk alike, and beneath the celebration, two forces prepared for war. Lucien commanded palace security as planned. His forces were positioned exactly where the conspirators expected. Guards loyal to the king were disguised as servants and festival workers, invisible until needed. The trap was set. Midday, Lord Ashford approached with practiced casualness. "Your Grace, are your men ready? They're in position. And the king? Reviewing festival events in the main courtyard. Surrounded by crowds. Vulnerable," Ashford smiled. "Perfect. We move in 1 hour. Your forces stand down and ours advance. Quick, clean. Over before anyone realizes what happened. Understood." Ashford gripped Lucian's shoulder. "You're doing the right thing, Duke. This kingdom needs strength, not sentiment." Lucian nodded, letting the man see acceptance. Inside, he was counting minutes and calculating angles. 58 minutes until the conspirators revealed themselves completely. 58 minutes until the king's forces sprang the trap. 58 minutes until Lucien either saved the kingdom or destroyed it. He found his position overlooking the main courtyard. The king stood on a raised platform, addressing festival crowds with practiced charm. Royal guards surrounded him, but they were spread thin to maintain the illusion of accessibility. Exactly as the conspirators had demanded. 40 minutes. Lucian watched Ashford position his men. They moved through crowds with predatory precision, closing the net around the king. Other conspirators appeared at strategic points, coordinated, professional. If Lucien did nothing, the king would die in the next 20 minutes. 30 minutes. Movement to Lucien. Left. Lord Pemberton approaching with armed men. "Your Grace, we're in position. Give the order to stand down." This was it. The moment of commitment. Order his forces to withdraw and the conspiracy succeeded. Refuse and the trap sprang early with unpredictable results. Lucien met Pemberton's eyes. "My forces are already withdrawn. Look closer." Pemberton frowned, scanning the courtyard. Then his expression shifted to horror as he realized the guards he thought were Lucian's men were actually festival workers. Palace staff. Civilians. The actual guards were hidden elsewhere, waiting. "You bastard," Pemberton hissed. "You betrayed us." "No," Lucien said quietly. "I betrayed you." He raised his hand, and across the courtyard, the king's hidden forces revealed themselves. Hundreds of soldiers disguised as festival attendees suddenly produced weapons and royal insignia. The conspirators found themselves surrounded. Their carefully planned coup turned into an ambush. Ashford saw it happen and screamed orders to attack anyway. His men lunged toward the king, but they were already outnumbered 5-1. The king's guards cut them down with brutal efficiency. Within minutes, it was over. The conspirators were either dead or in chains. Ashford himself was dragged before the king, bleeding and furious. "You used him," Ashford spat, glaring at Lucien. "Made him your spy." The king stepped forward. "Duke Blackthorn reminded me that loyalty is earned, not demanded. You offered him freedom, Lord Ashford, but he already had it. He chose to stand with me because I protected what mattered to him." The king gestured, and Eveline was brought forward with Oliver. They'd been watching from a secure location, and relief flooded Eveline's face when she saw Lucien unharmed. "This is what you underestimated," the king continued. "A man with something worth protecting is infinitely more dangerous than a man with nothing to lose. Duke Blackthorn didn't betray you for power or position. He betrayed you because you threatened his family." Ashford's expression twisted with hatred. "Then kill me. Because if you don't, I'll spend the rest of my life hunting them." The king's smile was cold. "No, Lord Ashford. You'll spend the rest of your life in a cell, watching the kingdom prosper without you." Ashford was dragged away screaming threats. The other conspirators followed. By sunset, every participant had been identified, arrested, and imprisoned. The coup had failed completely. That night, the king hosted a private dinner for Lucien and his family. Just the five of them, the king, Lucien, Evelyn, Oliver, and the queen who'd been in protective isolation during the conspiracy. "The debt is paid," the king said quietly. "You've given me more than I asked, saved my life and kingdom. Whatever you need from the crown, it's yours." Lucien looked at Evelyn holding Oliver, both of them finally safe. Then back at the king. "Permission to go home," Lucien said. "That's all I want. To return to Blackthorn Manor and build something that lasts." The king smiled. "Granted. And Duke, thank you for everything." They left London the next morning. The city felt different now, lighter, like removing the conspirators had let it breathe again. The journey north took 4 days of steady travel. Oliver chattered endlessly about the festival and palace. His fear transformed into excitement now that danger had passed. Evelyn watched Lucien carefully. "You're quiet. Just thinking. About what?" "How close we came to losing everything. But we didn't." "No, but we could have. One wrong move and—" Evelyn took his hand. "But you didn't make the wrong move. You chose loyalty and family simultaneously. That takes strength most men don't have, or stupidity." She laughed. "Maybe both. But it worked." Blackthorn Manor appeared through northern mist like a promise kept. The estate looked different after months away. More solid. More real. Like it had been waiting for them to come home. Marcus greeted them in the entrance hall, relief visible despite his professional composure. "Your Grace, Mrs. Blackthorn. Welcome home." "It's good to be back," Lucien said. Oliver immediately ran toward the library, his voice echoing through restored halls. The manor absorbed the sound like it had been designed for exactly this kind of joy. Evelyn moved to stand beside Lucien on the terrace overlooking the cliffs. The ocean crashed against rocks below, violent and eternal. But up here, wrapped in his arms, she felt safe. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we live. Restore the estate completely. Raise Oliver. Build the future we almost lost. No more wars." "I can't promise that. The king will call when he needs me. And you'll go." "Yes, but I'll always come back. Because you gave your word, because I love you." The simplicity of the statement made Evelyn's eyes fill with tears. After everything they'd survived, conspiracy and scandal and death, love remained the most powerful force. "I love you too," she whispered. "Even when you're being impossible, especially then." That night, after Oliver was asleep, Lucien stood in Thomas's old workshop. The room had been cleaned, but otherwise left untouched. Tools hung on walls, plans lay scattered across workbenches, dreams frozen in time. Evelyn found him there, studying architectural drawings his brother had made years ago. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Thomas, how much he would have loved meeting you and Oliver. How different things might have been if he'd lived. You'd still be the Iron Duke, alone and ruthless, probably, but at least Thomas would have been happy." Evelyn wrapped her arms around him from behind. "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think Thomas would be proud of who you've become, of the family you've built, of the man you chose to be instead of the monster everyone expected." Lucien turned to face her. "I'm not sure I chose. You just didn't give me another option." "Good. Someone needed to save you from yourself." He kissed her slowly, tasting future and possibility. When they broke apart, Evelyn was smiling. "So what do we do with all this?" she asked, gesturing at the workshop. "We finish what Thomas started, the renovations, the expansions, everything he dreamed about. That will take years." "Good. We have time because they did." For the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Manor, time felt abundant instead of scarce. The threats had been defeated, the debts paid, the future secured. Not perfect, never perfect, but theirs. Over the following months, Blackthorn Manor transformed. The renovations Thomas had planned became reality. Gardens bloomed, trade routes reopened. The estate became not just a home, but a symbol of what happened when power chose growth over domination. Lucien still ruled the northern territories with fierce efficiency, but efficiency now included mercy. Strategy included compassion, and power served protection instead of just control. The aristocracy whispered about his transformation. Some called it weakness. Others called it evolution. Lucien called it survival, because the man who'd arrived at Blackthorn Manor 18 months ago had been dying inside, haunted by guilt, incapable of human connection, building empires from other people's fear. That man was dead, killed by a widow who refused to kneel and a boy who trusted him with wooden horses. And Lucien had no intention of bringing him back. One evening, standing on the terrace with Evelyn while Oliver played in the gardens below, Lucien felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. "What are you smiling about?" Evelyn asked. "Just thinking how far we've come. From that first night when I found you in the library to now. Do you regret any of it?" "Not a single moment. Even the parts where we almost died? Especially those. They reminded me what actually matters." Evelyn leaned against him. "And what matters, Your Grace?" "This, you, Oliver. The life we're building together. Not power, not reputation. Those are tools, useful but replaceable. This," Lucien gestured at the manor, the gardens, his family. "This is irreplaceable." "When did you become such a philosopher?" "When I stopped being afraid to feel things." The admission cost nothing now. Lucien had spent months learning that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that loving someone didn't make you fragile. That strength came from protecting what mattered, instead of protecting yourself from attachment. The Iron Duke had ruled through fear alone. But Lucien Blackthorn ruled through something infinitely more powerful. He ruled through love. And that made all the difference. Years later, when Oliver was grown and leading his own life, when Blackthorn Manor had become legendary for the Duke who chose family over empire, when Lucien's hair had gone silver and Evelyn's laugh lines had deepened with time, they would stand on the same terrace and remember. Remember the night candlelight burned behind windows that should have been dark. Remember the moment a desperate widow refused to surrender her dignity. Remember when the kingdom's most ruthless duke learned he was still capable of being human, and they would smile, because some stories aren't about power or conquest or building empires that crush everything in their path. Some stories are about two broken people finding each other in a ruined manor on the edge of cliffs, about choosing love when the world demanded dominance, about learning that the strongest fortresses aren't built from stone and fear. They're built from trust, from vulnerability, from the courage to let someone see your scars and love you anyway. Lucien Blackthorn had spent 30 years being the Iron Duke, but he'd spend the rest of his life being something far more dangerous. A man who'd finally learned that true power wasn't about controlling others. It was about protecting what you loved. And he protected his family with everything he had, until his last breath. And long after the kingdom forgot his titles and territories, they remembered the Duke who chose his family over everything else, the monster who learned to come home,